What if the Cullens attended Hogwarts? Part 2. Who wants potion? Alice asked, officially breaking the silence. In my peripheral vision, I saw the others rush towards her in their sudden excitement, though Rosalie continued to stare open-mouthed at her bronze-haired brother. Finally, when I was just beginning to consider the fact that she may never move again, she very slowly turned and began walking towards Alice. I felt a jolt of surprise as she reached for my hand on her way past, gently squeezing my fingers before swiftly releasing them. Edward, by the looks of things, was rooted to the spot. Maybe he was afraid to step out of the light, fearing that if he did so, his skin would revert to its usual extraordinariness. I unhurriedly moved in his direction, stopping only when I was a foot away. His hand reached up to caress my face, and I shivered slightly as his fingertips moved over my cheekbones, the tingling sensation his touch provoked seeming to penetrate my skull and shoot down my spine. I felt my breathing accelerate as my heart flew into a heavy sprint. "How?" he whispered, his voice filled with awe, as well as a desperate longing to understand. "Your skin reflects light," I explained. "The potion doesn't work by affecting you physically, it doesn't alter your body or genetic makeup. It works by attracting light, almost in the same way that a magnet would attract iron. That's why the potion was so dark, it absorbs the light and reduces the amount of rays that are reflected. Your skin, technically, is the same as it always has been, still hard like marble and protected against spells." "How long does it last?" Emmett asked from behind me. "Longer than most potions would for a human. That's the great thing about administering to vampires, your bodies use up fluids much more slowly than ours, so the effects of one small glass will last you days, rather than hours. I made enough that each one of you will be able to take another dose when this one wears off, so you'll be able to go out in the sun the entire time we here." Edward was still directing the same tender look at me. I laced my fingers through one of his hands and pulled him towards the tent. "I laid your things on the bed in Edward's room, Bella," said Alice. "I want you to do your hair as well. Soft curls will do, but my hair is going to get wet." "So what? It will only take you a couple of seconds to do it." "You may as well." I rolled my eyes and walked inside, still clutching Edward's hand. "She's going to be a nightmare, isn't she?" I don't know why I made that agreement. I only ended up asking her for help anyway. "Do you think she'll?" "Bella," Edward interrupted suddenly. I stopped and turned to look at him, and saw that his face was overflowing with emotion. He wound his arms about my waist and pulled me against his chest. "I don't know how to thank you. This is one thing that I don't think I'll ever to be able to repay you for. You've given me you," I murmured. "I am the one that's trying to make up the difference. I don't think I'll ever manage it." "It's the other way around," he disagreed. "Our lives were spent in the shadows before you came along. I've never felt so close to humans since I became a vampire as I have in the last 5 minutes. You still have superhuman strength and speed," I pointed out. "I can live with that," he smiled. I beamed at him, before reluctantly pulling away. "I have to go get ready now, or Alice will attack me." "Go on then," he laughed. "I don't want to put you in the path of danger." I grinned, pivoting on my heels and running up the stairs towards his room. It was the third door down, and when I stepped through it, I sighed happily at the sight of the clear blue sky overhead. I was almost looking forward to going to sleep that night. The immaculate Australian sky would undoubtedly offer a spectacular view, and I really couldn't wait to share it with my vampire boyfriend. I walked over to the bed where Alice had left my things. There laid the hybrid swimsuit, terrifying in every respect. My only comfort was Alice's promise that her brother would like it. Beside it was a short, emerald caftan, made of thin, delicate material, a pair of black, Gucci sunglasses, a set of gold-filled, wooden bead, and a pair of brown and gold toe-post sandals. When I had finished dressing, I performed the same grooming spell that I had demonstrated to the Cullens the day we had received the visit from Professor McGonagall. Then I crossed the room to peer into the giant mirror situated in the corner. All in all, the outfit was rather pretty, very summery, but it would have been better suited to someone with tanned skin and sun-kissed beach hair. The caftan wasn't as long as I would have preferred, either, but it was hardly the main concern, considering what was underneath it. My stomach clenched slightly as I recalled my nightmare. "Stop being such a coward, Bella," I said to myself, spinning towards the door and marching from the room before I could change my mind. The others were waiting for me downstairs, each of them already having changed. Esme was wearing a long, halter-neck sundress. It was plain and white, giving her the appearance of some kind of Greek goddess. Rosalie was wearing a soft orange ruffle dress that cut off at the top of her thighs. Once again, she looked like she should have been on the cover of Sports Illustrated. Her figure was perfect. Alice had selected a sapphire trapeze dress, which reached just above her knees. She had a large, silver beach bag slung over her shoulder. The twisted handle was navy, and there were patterns of the same shade covering the rest of the fabric. On anyone else, the outfits would have passed for casual. On the vampires, however, they would have looked just as good on the red carpet as they would on a sandy beach. I found myself suddenly considering the idea of feigning sickness and insisting that they all go on without me. If I had thought that I would have been able to pull it off and deceive the Cullens, I probably would have gone through with it. I looked across at Edward as I reached the bottom of the stairs. He seemed to be assessing my outfit, his eyes lingering on the hem of my caftan as I approached. They had a hungry look about them. I felt my heartbeat accelerate at his stare. He was wearing a simple, white tank top and black beach shorts. His father and brothers had been given similar garments, too. Emmett's tank top was black, and he had red beach shorts. Jasper's top was white, whilst his shorts were navy. Carlisle was wearing an indigo tank top, and his bottoms were a deep shade of gray. To finish off their outfits, Alice appeared to have adorned them all with surfer beads. The shade of the accessories coordinated to match the tones of their clothing. I smiled. "Ready to go?" asked Esme. "Sure," I answered, not being completely truthful in my attempts to hide my self-consciousness. She and Carlisle led us all out of the tent and through the trees. Edward and I followed at the back, my fingers laced through his. I slipped occasionally as the slope of the hill grew steeper. Luckily, Edward's super reflexes saved me before I could hurt myself, and eventually he just resigned himself to carrying me until we reached the bottom. I would have protested, only it was safer not to. I'd almost broken my neck 5 times already. Our hill was located directly beside a white sandy beach, which looked out onto bright blue waves, perfect for those with an interest in surfing. There were numerous hotels and apartments situated nearby, which, at the moment, were catering to those wanting to take advantage of the dry season. I saw very few children. The semesters probably weren't the same here, due to the seasonal differences, but there was an abundance of adults and teenagers. Hundreds of heads turned in our direction as we headed down the beach. Rosalie had pulled Emmett to the front and was leading our party. She claimed that she was trying to find a good spot, but I suspected that she was simply enjoying the adoration she was receiving from the flabbergasted males that were lining the shore. I wasn't ignorant of the stares of the women. Either their eyes remained fixed to the men, especially Edward, watching like hawks after catching sight of tasty-looking prey. My jaw clenched. "What's wrong?" Edward asked, obviously hearing the sound of my teeth grinding together. "Oh, it's nothing. I am just contemplating whether or not I should perform nose hair growing jinxes on each of these females. They look like they could use a distraction." When my eyes snapped to Edward's face, I saw that his mouth was pressed into a hard line as he tried to suppress the wave of laughter my statement had threatened to cause. I huffed. "You know, you really are cute when you're jealous. It's almost worth all the attention we seem to draw." "I am not jealous. I just think they could be a little less obvious about it. Like you were when you first saw us in the cafeteria," he teased, drawing his hand from mine before winding his arm over my shoulder. He pulled our bodies closer, and I slid my arm around his waist in response, feeling thoroughly appeased as the women glared at me resentfully. "Better, slightly," I answered, though I couldn't prevent the satisfaction from creeping into my voice. Finally, Rosalie picked a spot, and began laying out the towels with Alice. Jasper and Emmett wasted no time, both of them immediately charging for the water the second they had rid themselves of their shirts, diving beneath the azure waves with incredible grace. I sat down with the remaining vampires. They, evidently, wanted to relax in the sun for a while longer, which was understandable considering the fact that they very rarely saw it. 15 minutes after our arrival, however, Edward was ready to join his brothers. "Do you want to go for a swim?" he asked happily. You go ahead. I'll be down in a couple of minutes." He smiled and pulled off his top, before jogging towards the sea. You can put it off forever, Bella, Alice sang, her eyes on her brother as he wandered into the water. Put what off? Asked Rosalie. I silently prayed that Alice wasn't about to disclose my fears to her astonishingly beautiful sister. That was the last thing I needed naturally, therefore, she did. Bella is having a case of nerves. She's afraid to remove the caftan. Rosalie's mouth twitched at the corners as she tried to conceal her amusement. She fluidly rose to her feet and shimmied out of her dress, revealing her vampiric figure in all its glory. I felt my self-esteem plummet dramatically. The effect was doubled as Alice rose to her feet and did the same. Both were wearing bikinis of the same color as their outfits. Rosalie's was a halter neck, whereas Alice's was a tube. Together, they lifted me up to my feet, one on either side of me, before proceeding to pull the comforting caftan over my head as I protested. Alice slid the sunglasses from my face and removed the beads from around my neck, whilst Rosalie stood inspecting my suit. That's a good choice, she explained. It will reveal enough to show you off, yet cover enough to make him want to see more. Rose, I exclaimed, thoroughly mortified by her statement and unable to banish my awareness to the presence of Carlyle and Esme. I am just saying that's how adolescent guys work. Edward is over 100 years old, I whispered. His body is frozen at 17. I am sure the mechanics are exactly the same now as they were back in the early 1900s. I truly wanted to die, now. If it hadn't been for the fact that I was so utterly embarrassed, I probably would have been worrying about sunburn. My cheeks were burning profusely with the heat of my blush. They each linked an arm through mine, then, and began walking me towards the sea. The boys were floating a little way away, laughing and attempting to push each other beneath the surface. Emmett noticed our approach before I could make it into the water, thereby alerting his brothers to our arrival, causing them to turn and look at us. Edward instantly froze, and, despite the distance which separated us, his penetrating gaze burned along my skin more forcefully than the rays of the afternoon sun. I could practically feel the butterflies fluttering around in my stomach. The air temperature could have been no less than 80 degrees Fahrenheit, and although the water was warmer than I had expected, the rapid change in heat created mild discomfort. Wait, I am going to need some time to get used to this, I winced. Give me a few minutes and I'll come and meet you. All right, said Rosalie, releasing my arm in the same moment that Alice did, but if you not in soon, we coming back for you. Her promise, strangely enough, managed to put a smile on my face. There had been a time when she had done her best to ignore me. The gradual change in her attitude and her occasional friendly and appreciative gestures really did make me feel like we were making definite progress as friends. I knew full well, of course, that if it hadn't been for my magical abilities and everything that I was suddenly able to introduce the family to, nothing much would really have changed. She would have treated me civilly, but her resentment would have overshadowed anything else she felt for me. The girls began to swim away towards their husbands, traveling at a leisurely pace in order to avoid any unwanted attention as they left. However, Edward drew nearer. He stopped when he was about 10 meters away, watching silently as he waited for me to enter the ocean. Realizing that the sooner my body was submerged, the sooner I would no longer be on show, I waded into the waves, shivering slightly as the chill tingled up my spine, until I was eventually waist deep, directly facing Edward. It's a little nippy, I said shyly. My favorite crooked smile crept onto his face as he replied, I can really empathize. I smiled meekly, not entirely sure what course of action to take next. He closed the space between us, stopping only when I could feel his icy breath on my face. I was very aware of my hammering pulse as his fingertips stroked gently up and down my back, with no more pressure than he would have used if he had been touching a soap bubble. The pressure on my back suddenly increased and, in the next instant, I found myself pressed against him, the lines of our bodies fitting so closely together that we were in danger of merging into one single being. I was definitely grateful to Edward when he lowered his face towards mine. I seriously doubted that I would have been able to speak with the state I was in. My breathing was coming so fast that it was bordering on hyperventilation, and if I hadn't been standing in the water, my jelly legs probably would have caused me to collapse to the floor. His lips moved to kiss along my jaw and down towards the base of my neck when I finally pulled away to breathe. I like your suit, he said huskily, his lips moving against my collarbone. Me too, I said in a daze, relief flooding my brain as I realized the stupidity of my earlier fears. I guess Rosalie and Alice had been right. I should have trusted them to start with. They clearly knew more about men than I did. You're beautiful, Bella. I am really not looking forward to having to listen to the thoughts of the men around here when they see you like this. I don't think that will be a problem if I am walking next to vampires. You obviously don't know very much about how men's minds work. I think we already covered that. Still, I couldn't bring myself to agree with Edward. In the next moment, he was pulling us into deeper water, towards his brothers and sisters. Rosalie was sat on Emmett's shoulders, whilst Alice was seated on Jasper's, both attempting to knock one another into the water. Who do you think will win? I asked, turning to face Edward, only to find that he had vanished. All of a sudden, I was being propelled out of the ocean, my legs arranged in the same way as the other girls about my boyfriend's neck. I automatically clenched my thighs to stop myself from falling, though I don't think that Edward would have allowed that to happen, regardless. Edward, I protested, what are you doing? You don't really expect me to try and wrestle your sisters? I haven't the slightest chance. They'll go easy on you, he laughed. I didn't argue. It was nice to see him in such a carefree mood. I liked it. Ah, look, cried Emmett, as we neared the group, the little witch has come to challenge the vampires. I don't see why I shouldn't. I smiled playfully, his patronizing tone forcing me into retaliation. Bless, he chuckled. It's like a little lamb wishing it were cool enough to take down a pride of lions. And you think strength equates to coolness, do you, Emmett? This is Emmett you talking to, Bella, Edward laughed. Of course, he does. Silly, macho vampire, I teased. Witches and wizards are far cooler. Hell no, he argued good-humoredly. A vampire could kill a witch in a heartbeat. True, I chuckled, but a qualified witch could turn your Jeep into a baby elephant. You'd look great riding one of those through town. His eyes narrowed slightly, but his face never lost its look of amusement. I faintly registered the fact that Edward was edging us closer, until only a few feet separated us. Making threats, are we? Not at all, I answered. Just pointing out the facts of the matter. Edward lunged forwards then in the same moment that Jasper did. Rosalie and Emmett appeared to be the only ones taken by surprise. My hands reflexively shot out in front of me, briefly brushing Rose's shoulder, just as Alice's palms launched at her target. Rosalie fell backwards into the water, pulling her husband with her. Alice, Jasper and Edward broke out into fits of laughter, whilst I stared on confusedly in the rush of everything. The entire movement had been perfectly synchronized and had happened within the space of a second. My eyes flashed to the victorious vampires as Rosalie and Emmett resurfaced. Edward must have been listening to Jasper's thoughts, the two of them secretly planning whilst I had unintentionally distracted their brother. Alice had obviously seen it all before it had happened. Did the big scary lion get beaten by the lamb? Edward asked mockingly. Emmett's face was a picture. I burst out laughing, clutching my stomach as I did so. The next thing I knew, I was being forced backwards, falling from Edward's shoulder into the blue waves. The entire thing was so fast that I didn't realize what had happened until I was inhaling a mouthful of seawater. I spluttered as my head broke into the warm, fresh air. Edward, too, by the looks of things, had been submerged. We both looked over to the triumphant couple who were cheering at their success. Champions, they sang together, Jasper's still carrying his petite wife, whose arms were raised in celebration. Champions, Alice dove from her husband's shoulders and into the water, and we all laughed together, splashing around like a group of ordinary teenagers. Carlisle and Esme joined us later, and we must have spent at least an hour playing amongst the waves. Eventually, however, the doctor pointed out my reddening shoulders, and suggested that I return to the shore to apply a layer of sunblock. Oh, damn, I said as I peered at the rosy marks that were forming on my skin. I was going to apply a screening spell before I came out. I forgot. My eyes flicked to the people sat along the sand. I could probably pull it off without them noticing, but it would be irresponsible to risk it. It's all right, Bella, said Alice. I packed a high-factor sun lotion. It's in the bag. Edward and I left the others in the water as we headed towards the shore hand in hand. I was right, he growled quietly, his eyes flying to a group of boys near to where our towels were laid. A jinx would be good now, Bella, or maybe I should consider a more serious course of action. When we reached our spot, I pulled the sun block from Alice's bag, holding it out for Edward to take. His brow furrowed slightly as he grasped it. Maybe you could get the message across without resorting to violence. His earlier reaction to my swimsuit had given me a boost in confidence, so I daringly shuffled in front of him and pulled my hair over my shoulder. He chuckled quietly at my suggestion, and kissed my shoulder lightly as he swept the last few strands of hair out of the way. "Lie down, Bella," he murmured, to which I complied, the butterflies active in my stomach once more. I positioned myself on my front, with my hands resting beneath my chin. I squeaked as the cold lotion dribbled onto my skin, earning another throaty chuckle from Edward. His hands traveled slowly over the length of my back, gently massaging and spreading the sun block. It felt wonderful, like something you'd expect when receiving a spa treatment. My body reacted accordingly the lower his hands traveled, and my heart was hammering so fast that I wouldn't have been at all shocked if it had started forcing me into the air like the spring of a pogo stick. It picked up, even more so, when Edward began applying the stuff to the backs of my legs. "Is there something the matter with your heart?" he asked, the tone of his voice indicating that he was undoubtedly enjoying himself. "No," I answered as he finished, my mouth suddenly feeling very dry. "I'd say it's working just fine." I shifted into a sitting position and began covering the rest of my body with lotion, my awareness of Edward's lingering stare never dwindling. He smiled as I caked my nose with a protective layer. "I feel like a greased-up monkey," I muttered, stuffing the bottle back into the bag. "I like it," he laughed. I rolled my eyes, before giving a brief glance at the nearby group of boys. None of them were looking at me, though one of them, a muscular blonde who looked to be about 20, was glaring at Edward in a Mike Newton-type fashion. "Was the experiment effective?" "Definitely," he said, his voice infused with satisfaction. "I think we should put it into practice more often." I smirked and turned back to him. "Is that because you managed to get the message across, or because you enjoyed it?" "A bit of both," he admitted, smiling mischievously. Edward held out his arm for me as he laid down, and I settled beside him, my head rested against his chest. The day was perfect. We spent the hours switching between relaxing in the Australian heat and playing in the water. Alice had packed 2 beach paddles and a ball. We played with those for a while, but, unfortunately, I wasn't a natural-born beater. When I jumped to hit the ball, I usually missed and ended up crashing into the water, much to Edward's amusement. We stayed on the beach until 5. I fell asleep at one point, completely exhausted as a result of the time difference. The Cullens agreed that we would spend the evening in the tent to allow me to catch up on my sleep. I had insisted that they go exploring without me, but they seemed perfectly content with the idea of staying inside. Emmett and Jasper occupied themselves with a game of wizarding chess, both of them whooping in delight whenever one of the pieces did something interesting. I think Jasper struck up a good friendship with one of his knights after the excessive compliments it paid him on his strategic skills. Rosalie and Alice were busy soaking in the jacuzzi, whilst Carlisle and Esme kept themselves busy with more books from the shelves. I climbed into bed at 8:30. I had tried to stay awake for as long as possible, knowing that if I went to sleep too early I would be just as worn out the following night. The sky was as dark as midnight, clear and littered with thousands of stars, which sparkled like burning diamonds against the blackness. The next day was much the same as the first, only the Cullens siblings decided it would be a good and fun idea to buy boards for each of us. I couldn't say that I was fond of the concept of trying my hand at surfing. My balance was reserved specifically for sitting down. Chairs and brooms I could handle, but boards of any kind were another matter entirely. I fell more times than I could count, and not once did I manage to stand up fully. The vampires, on the other hand, had no problems. They rode the waves as if they each had the experience of professional surfers, and I don't think I was the only one to be completely mesmerized as they danced with the ocean. Dozens looked on in wonder, entranced by their beauty and graceful movements. We spent the evening walking along the coast, enjoying the fiery colors which streaked across the sky as the sun began to set, creating the illusion that the stratus was ablaze. On the 3rd day of our trip, the Cullens and I traveled to Ayers Rock. Carlisle had requested that we visit it, and I was only too happy to oblige in taking him. I had my own reasons for wanting to see the place. "Are we going to climb it?" asked Emmett. "No," said Carlyle firmly. "Uluru is sacred to the local aboriginals. It would be disrespectful to do so." No one argued, though Emmett did stare on disappointedly at the monumental monolith. I followed the Cullens around the rock, all the while keeping my eyes peeled for the sign of a deep fracture in the wall. Alice found it before I did. She skipped happily towards the crack, her fingers trailing along the small engravings on either side. On the left, there was an image of a dragon, and on the right there was a plain circle. I extracted my wand from my purse, and tapped the dragon twice, and the circle 5 times. Immediately, the ground began to tremble, whilst the crack in the wall grew wider and wider, opening up into a 3-foot-wide fissure, revealing a rocky corridor that led away into the darkness. "Well, I was not expecting that," said Emmett as he peered into the shadows. "What's down there, Bella?" asked Carlyle. "The wizarding version of a shopping mall," I answered, stepping into the passageway. The others followed me in, and we walked in singular file, descending further and further into the earth, winding this way and that through the gloomy corridor. The only light came from torches on the walls, but they were spaced so far apart from each other that they did little to expel the shadows. "How did you find out about this place?" Edward questioned, his voice loaded with intrigue. "I did some research before we set off from Washington. There's a book in your tent that lists the various places of interest in different countries around the world." A few minutes after we had entered Uluru, we came to a fork in the corridor. On the wall leading off into the left-hand passage was the same dragon picture we had encountered earlier, only this one was much larger. On the other side was the circle. "Which way should we go first, Alice?" I asked. "Let's take the right, first. We can check out the museum after we've bought supplies." "Supplies," said Carlyle. "Supplies," nodded Alice, giving nothing away. Edward grinned like a Cheshire cat as we turned down the right-hand passage. I directed a questioning look at him. Alice showed me what's down the left corridor. "I can't wait to see it." "Me neither," I smiled. Finally, we reached the end of ominous walkway. I felt my jaw drop as I gazed at the sight before me. The passage had opened up into a tremendously vast dome-shaped cavern. It housed dozens of shops and restaurants, all of which had been built into the circular red stone wall, leaving the space of the hall completely free, save for a gigantic obsidian fountain standing at its center. A sinister-looking dragon statue rose up from middle, its eyes replaced with burning white fire, whilst a thick jet of clear water sprayed from its mouth. We explored the dome, discovering everything it had to offer. Jasper and Emmett had the time of their lives in Zester's palace, Uluru's joke shop. They found a number of things which interested them, ranging from magical fireworks to trick sweets. "What are you planning on doing with those?" I asked warily, indicating the box of hypnotic fudge in Emmett's hands as we left the shop. The candy was charmed to make the person who swallowed it think that they were some kind of farm animal. "I am not sure yet," he answered, "but I am seriously considering feeding it to the Slytherins." I laughed loudly, then, exceedingly happy with Emmett's devilish scheming. My favorite store was undoubtedly the sweet shop, Lollipockets. It was brilliant 3 times as big as Honeydukes, and there were sweets there that I'd never even heard of before, as well as the familiar ones stocked in British stores, including Bertie Bott's every flavor beans, fizzing Whizbees, chocolate frogs, and blood-flavored lollipops. I was more interested in the unknown candy, though. There was a bunch of fascinating products, such as Botecate's brilliant chocolate Okraline. The magical praline gave anyone who ate an incredible opera-singing voice, the effects of which lasted roughly 5 minutes, enough for one song. There were also morphing mallows, the makeover sweet, which had the power to temporarily alter an individual's appearance by lending them the powers of a metamorphagus. They had Jolly Beans, too, which sent the consumer into a short phase of euphoria. The fairy floss, however, was the most interesting form of candy in terms of appearance. It was made in store, and was available in a range of colors, such as pale pink, baby blue, mint green, silver, and gold, all of which sparkled prettily. What was so fascinating about it was the fact that it came in a bouquet, and actual fairies would flutter out of the floss to slide flowers into the hair of the purchaser. Edward caught me staring at the sugary bunches, and insisted on buying me a stick. The assistant even allowed us to select the flowers we wanted. My bouquet was made up of snowdrops, baby-s breath, jasmine and orange blossom, all surrounding a head-sized ball of silver fairy floss. The others followed Edward's lead, seeming to decide that buying me a variety of sweets would help to convey their appreciation for the potion I had made them. I don't know why they were so insistent. It had been their money I'd used to buy the ingredients after all, and it wasn't as if I'd had to expend lots of time making it, but I suppose they wanted to return the gesture. I received everything from slithering caramel snakes to opaline. The floss was my favorite by far, even though I hadn't tried the other candies. Within an hour, my hair was littered with lovely white flowers, and whenever a fairy flew out from between the leaves and petals to decorate my mahogany locks, I couldn't suppress the girly impulse to giggle. Edward found that very entertaining for some reason. He and his family enjoyed lollipockets almost as much as I did. They seemed overjoyed by the fact that they had found a type of candy they could actually consume and appreciate. I've never had a lollipop before, Carlyle beamed. What kind of blood does it taste like? I asked. Like diluted human blood, said Emmett, after a moment, his face pensive. It reminds me of watermelons. Watermelons, I scoffed. Yeah, watermelons are still fruit, but their flavor is nowhere near as strong as oranges or strawberries. They're watery and sugary, yet still pleasant. Interesting, I said, smiling as we turned into the dragon-marked corridor. We descended down a rocky staircase that seemed to go on forever. Finally, however, we reached the bottom, the passageway opening up into an enormous hall, exactly the same as last time, only this one was even bigger than the first. Hundreds of torches were fixed to the wall, illuminating the area and the colossal skeleton lying at its center. Is that a dragon? Asked Rosalie, who was completely astounded by the sight. Yes, it's an Antipodean opal eye. They're usually found in New Zealand, but some migrate if they can find a free territory to claim. This species is relatively small for a dragon. That's small, Emmett said incredulously. What did you expect? I laughed. I am not sure. Something as tall as an elephant, maybe. Well, that thing is definitely taller than an elephant, Jasper noted. He, like his brother, stared on in wonder. The sight had been enough to distract him from his lollipop, which he had been furiously licking ever since purchasing it. We spent an hour in the museum. The Cullens were keen to see everything, and like regular tourists, their excitement was making them snap happy. Alice forced the men to pose in front of the remains. The sight was actually pretty hysterical. They flexed their muscles as if insinuating that they had slain the creature themselves. Then, of course, they forced the girls to do the same. Emmett shook with laughter as he watched me, and loudly stated that a bunny would beat me in a battle of strength. That was when I threatened to spike his supply of dragon's blood with a strength-sapping solution. He was a little more cautious after that. There were other interesting things on exhibition in the hall, including a preserved dragon skin. The scales were iridescent and pearly, and glittered in the light, though not as brightly as vampire skin. The Cullens each noted how tough they seemed, and although they would have still been able to tear them apart, the scales would have been infinitely more difficult to destroy than bare skin. That was incredible, said Carlyle as we passed back into the open air. It's one thing to be told that dragons exist, but it's another thing entirely to see them for yourself. I'll say, agreed Edward. I nodded. That was one thing I could definitely relate to. Is there anyone nearby? I asked, not wanting to risk returning to Burley Heads until I knew it was safe. The eyes of the vampires swept the landscape, whilst they listened carefully for the sound of human activity. There's no one on this side of the rock, said Edward. The local aboriginals are on the other. Okay, good, let's OWW. The family spun at my outburst, concern sweeping each of their expressions. I stared at my arm in confusion, where a tiny red mark had developed. Must be an insect sting, I muttered, my fingers gently stroking the blemish. Come on, let's get back. We were back at our campsite within a minute. Rosalie suggested that we spend the rest of the day down at the beach, since it was only 1 o'clock. The vampires began a new conversation then, discussing something or other. I wasn't sure what. I wasn't really concentrating on them, because I had just caught sight of an exceedingly interesting cloud. I giggled quietly at the sight of it. Then I giggled some more, a little louder this time, and then I broke out into full-blown hysterics. Bella, said Jasper, his face painted with both amusement and bewilderment. "Are you all right?" I tried to speak, but I couldn't get the words out. My chest was tightening and I could barely breathe. I tried to wipe the tears from my eyes but more replaced them. "Bella, what is?" asked Edward, whose expression matched that of his brother. I pointed at the sky, falling to my knees as I did so. "Bear," I wheezed. "Teddy bear clouds, Emmett." "Huh," said Emmett dumbly, his eyes scanning the sky. "The cloud, it looks like a teddy bear, and I thought of you." My explanation only served in renewing my laughter, and I hooted so hard that pains shot through my torso as my muscles cramped. "I remind you of a teddy bear." I nodded, the tears spilling more rapidly down my face. The Cullens looked at each other warily, clearly under the impression that I was going mad. Maybe I was. I shouldn't have found that funny, but I did. "I think we should rename you," I giggled, my eyes flying to the burly vampire. "Emmett isn't really a name for a teddy bear." "How about Buttons?" Jasper's mouth pressed into a hard line and he shook with silent laughter, but the others stared on blankly, unable to make anything of my sudden giddiness. I jumped to my feet then and ran towards Edward, launching myself into his arms and kissing him on the cheek. "Let us play. Edward, you can be the putty tat. I'll be the canary. Catch me." I jumped from his grasp and hurtled through the forest, my balance somehow having dramatically improved as I raced away from him, my hair billowing behind me. A flash of bronze streaked past me, and then he was there, cutting me off, his face unreadable. I squealed and changed direction, my heart pumping madly as the adrenaline coursed through my veins. The next thing I knew, I was being swept up by Edward's strong, muscular arms, laughing hysterically throughout the entire thing. "Oh no, please don't hurt me, Mr. Putty Tat. I'll be good, I promise. I swear I'll do anything you want." Then I was inside the tent, being lowered onto the soft cushions at center of the main room. I tried to get up, feeling too hyper to remain immobile, but a pair of cold hands held me down. "I think we can all agree that this isn't Bella's normal behavior," Edward said. "We need to figure out what's causing her to act like this." "Maybe it's the candy," said Esme. "She doesn't have sweets very often. Perhaps this is just a sugar rush." "I doubt it," said Carlyle, shaking his head. "It would have happened sooner if that had been the case, and it wouldn't have come on so suddenly." "What about the sting on her arm?" Alice suggested. "The laughing fit started a few minutes after she mentioned it." "I want to get up," I giggled. "I want to dance." Edward's eyes grew wide for a second, before he said, "There's definitely something wrong with her. Alice, look ahead. It might give us some answers." I wasn't really concentrating on Alice's face. I was preoccupied once again by the sky above, but I vaguely registered her moving away from me after Edward gave his instruction. "Got it," she sang. My eyes flicked to look at her, and saw that she had taken Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them from one of the bookshelves. "The billywig," she read, "is an insect native to Australia. It is around half an inch long and a vivid sapphire blue, although its speed is such that it is rarely noticed by muggles and often not by wizards until they have been stung. The billywig's wings are attached to the top of its head and are rotated very fast so that it spins as it flies. At the bottom of the body is a long thin sting. Those who have been stung by a billywig suffer giddiness followed by levitation. Generations of young Australian witches and wizards have attempted to catch billywigs and provoke them into stinging in order to enjoy these side effects, though too many stings may cause the victim to hover uncontrollably for days on end, and where there is severe allergic reaction, permanent floating may ensue. Dried billywig stings are used in several potions and are believed to be a component in the popular sweet fizzing Whizbees. "Ha!" boomed Emmett. "This is going to be hilarious." Edward growled at his brother's remark. "Oh, come on, Edward. This can hardly be classed as a bad thing. At least Bella is enjoying herself. It's far better than it would have been with a regular sting." Edward's tight expression loosened as he regained his calm. Then, all of a sudden, a wide grin swept across his face. "I guess you rewrite Buttons." I burst out laughing, unable to control myself. The others joined in too, including Emmett, though his eyes narrowed at my insanely perfect boyfriend. "I don't know what you laughing at, Mr. Putty Tat." It hurt so bad my stomach and chest felt as if they would crack down the middle from laughing. "I don't understand how we could missed it," said Esme after she and the others had settled down. Edward released my arms and legs a second later, evidently no longer fearing for my safety or mental health. I jumped to my feet and immediately began spinning in circles, entranced by the way everything seemed to blur together. Woo, I remember a buzzing, said Jasper. It sounded like a regular insect, though nothing out of the ordinary, and we were looking away from Bella, checking the area to make sure we could leave. You're right, agreed Carlyle. It must have stung her then. The merging colors were very pretty, and I quickly increased my pace in my excitement, spinning faster until I couldn't retain my balance anymore. I fell backwards, my head connecting with the floor as I landed. Luckily, the carpet was so thick that it cushioned the impact, but I decided to play it up anyway. Edward, I laughed, holding my hands in the air and waiting for his face to enter my line of sight. The floor is hurting me. It's being mean. Tell it off. He walked to my side and leaned over me, a mischievous grin plastered to his face. Bella, I think you're the one that hurt the floor. There it was minding its own business and then you came along and fell on top of it. Perhaps you should apologize. Nope, I said, shaking my head, I refuse. If you were a nice boyfriend, you'd defend me against any enemy. And you count the floor as your enemy, do you? My arch nemesis, I nodded. Edward shook with laughter, though no sound exited his mouth. My head snapped over to his parents and siblings. Their bodies were trembling in the exact same way. Even Carlyle was having difficulty containing his amusement. Edward's eyes flicked from me to the floor, and narrowed, though he failed in beating back his smile. Floor, he said seriously, you have gravely mistreated my Bella. As her fiancé, it is my duty to inform you that should you commit such an insufferable crime in the future I will destroy you. Now growl at it, I commanded. Edward instantly released a deafening, primal roar, which I attempted to mimic, thus, sending a wave of hoots and cheers rippling throughout the tent. Then he pulled me from the carpet and swung me onto his back. I don't want you to have to touch it after it offended you so strongly. Thank you, I sang merrily, locking my limbs around his neck and torso, before smothering his cheek with kisses. He chuckled joyfully in response. It'll think twice next time. It will, he agreed. I pointed my hand in the direction of the stairs, my giggles recommencing, and shouted, "Hi-oh Silver, away." The others burst into fits of laughter. Jasper laid spread-eagled on the floor, experiencing the hilarity of the situation for himself, as well as simultaneously feeling it through the others. Edward ran me into his room, and deposited me on the bed, where I immediately began bouncing, singing the lyrics to songs by the Weird Sisters as I flew up and down, whilst he remained at the foot of the bed, grinning wickedly as he watched me. I tried to jump even higher, enjoying the feeling of the bed springs thrusting me back into the air, but suddenly everything seemed to slow, as if time were grinding to a halt. Bella, said Edward, as I stared around confusedly. When I next looked at him, his eyes were fixed on my feet. You're floating. I peered downward. Sure enough, a gap about 3 feet long separated me from the bed. Huh, so I am. I grinned wildly, and moved my arms and legs in circular motions, as if attempting the breaststroke in midair, as I tried to propel myself towards the vampire. This isn't working. I am stranded. Edward laughed hard now, obviously amused by my helplessness. Clearly, the damsel in distress act wasn't going to work this time. I took a different approach and swung my arms above my head like I was about to throw an invisible lasso. I quickly released the imaginary rope and began pulling Edward towards me. He played along, jumping onto the bed in one easy bound. Gotcha, now you're my prisoner. That's hardly something to complain about. I giggled at his words and threw my arms about his neck. Do you like my flowers? I asked, indicating the delicate buds the fairies had fixed into my hair. They're very pretty, he nodded. Do you think I am pretty? What a silly question, he laughed. Do you? Of course, he said, I think you're the prettiest, most beautiful girl in existence. Well, I think you're sexy. Laughter exploded through the tent. Edward had left the door ajar, so the Cullens had undoubtedly heard my comment, and it appeared that they were thoroughly enjoying my honesty. Edward, too, couldn't help but crack a smile. Come on, little witch. Let's go downstairs. Edward grabbed my leg and pulled me through the air like he would a kite. When we reached the railing, He pushed me over the side, chuckling as I floated down towards the ground. Alice ran beneath me and pushed me back upwards so that I flew in Jasper's direction. He quickly saw where she was going, and the entire family were soon playing along, gently pushing me through the air as if I was some kind of beach ball. I laughed the entire time, but the effects of the sting gradually began wearing off, and I started losing height. The lower I came to the ground, the faster my amusement faded, and soon enough I was lying on the floor, burying my face in the pillows, praying for the ground to open up and swallow me whole. Emmett and Jasper made a great deal of jokes at my expense, and the others couldn't help but laugh along with them. "That was completely brilliant," said Emmett, his eyes alight with joy. "Mortifying more like," I responded, my voice muffled by the silver cushion covering my head. "Billywigs are evil creatures." "No, they re not," Alice chuckled. "You seemed to have fun, and it was certainly entertaining for us." I groaned. She pulled me up then, and guided me in the direction of the stairs. "Come on, Bella, go get changed. We going down to the beach." I did as she instructed, glad to have some time alone in which I could allow the blush to recede from my face. It would take a little longer than usual, because it had risen all the way to my hairline. I put on the midnight blue bikini, and wrapped the sarong that Alice had bought me around my waist. I would have gone with a tankini instead, only I was hoping that a two-piece would have the effect of distracting Edward from the memory of my recent humiliation. It worked at first. His eyes bulged slightly upon seeing me, before they traveled the length of my body as I descended the stairs. He had sent the others on ahead whilst I had been busy changing, telling them that we would join them in due course. For that I was grateful. I wasn't ready yet for the surge of jokes I would undoubtedly receive from Emmett and Jasper. Luckily, Edward wasn't so bad at creating distractions himself, and I quickly found my embarrassment unraveling as other emotions took over. When we left the tent to join the others, I was chuckling too at my unfortunate experience, the high of kissing Edward overshadowing everything else. "It was one of the funniest things I've ever seen," he laughed, carrying me bridal style down the slope and onto the sand. "I am sure it was," I said, rolling my eyes, "but I, for one, hope that we meet no more Billywigs whilst we here." I walked alongside him towards the others with my hand in his, determined to enjoy the rest of the holiday, wondering all the while what the next 2 days would have in store. Luckily, that wasn't something I needed to worry about. The only hiccup throughout the entire trip was the Billywig incident. On our 4th day, we jumped to Townsville's marina, and Carlisle somehow managed to hire us a yacht. I didn't want to think how much he paid for it. Alice directed him south through the Coral Sea, leading him to the area of the reef she wanted to visit, whilst I laid out in the sun with the others. Edward was intent of feeding me Oprahline, and requested various songs after the magic had taken effect. I didn't mind obliging him. Botecate's sweets worked wonders, and whenever I opened my mouth to sing, it wasn't my voice which carried through the air. It would have been more believable to say that I had somehow managed to steal the voice of an angel. My normal singing voice was certainly nothing to brag about, nor was it something I wanted to share with the Cullens. I'd already suffered enough embarrassment by that point. I sang songs like Time to Say Goodbye, and the aria from the Phantom of the Opera, much to the delight of Renesmee, who listened enraptured throughout the entire performance. "Here, try one of these," said Edward, holding a marshmallow to my lips. I opened up, and he slid the sweet into my mouth. The morphing mallows were actually really nice, and tasted like strawberries and ice cream. Fortunately, I didn't grow a snout or anything like that. Instead, my hair receded into my scalp until it was roughly the length of Alice's, darkening slightly as it did so, whilst my irises turned a vivid sapphire. "Your ears have changed," laughed Alice. "You look like something from the Lord of the Rings." I felt along the ridges and found that she was right. My ears had grown in length, the top of them having sharpened to a point like those of an elf. The mallows must have been fond of the mythical look, because the next one I swallowed decided to turn me into some kind of traditional vampire. My hair fell down my back in gentle waves, the color almost black, whilst my skin turned an even paler shade of white. My eyes darkened to a deep brown, and my lips turned blood red. And then, of course, there were the snowy white fangs. Edward's eyes held a soft edge as looked at me. I didn't know what to make of the emotion I saw there. "See, you not a real vampire, Emmett," I chuckled. You're missing the key feature. Shall we test to see whose is more effective? He smirked. I think I'll pass. So how exactly are you planning on breathing when we go diving, Bella, since you insisted we not bother with an oxygen cask? Asked Jasper, officially changing the subject. I am going to cast a bubble head charm. My eyes will be protected then as well. I demonstrated the spell once Carlyle had anchored the yacht. It was certainly a more comfortable alternative to a snorkeling mask, which would have left marks on my face after wearing it for too long. When I dove beneath the surface of the water, I felt as if I was entering another world, an alien garden laden with lurid colors and pulsing with life. The tentacles of the anemones waved hypnotically as I watched, their movements resembling something close to a slow and subtle dance. I gazed on, completely mesmerized, but they couldn't hold my attention for long, not when the soft coral was there to compete. There were hundreds of different species painted in every color of the spectrum. My time amongst the shocking pinks, the bright yellows, and the rich purples made me wish for a second that I had been born a mermaid, but then Edward was at my side, pointing at a school of brightly colored fish up ahead, his face infinitely more dazzling than anyone or anything else in the world, and I was suddenly relieved that I lived on land. We saw everything from electric blue starfish and giant clams, to large green sea turtles and humpback whales. It was difficult to believe that such a world could exist beneath the surface of the ocean. From above, it was nothing more than an endless expanse of blue, a sapphire desert that seemed to go on forever. The animals avoided us for obvious reasons, but when we encountered a group of 7 dolphins, I put a bit of space between myself and the vampires, remembering something about the creatures that I had heard in passing at Hogwarts. When I was separated from the Cullens by about 15 meters, the dolphins drew closer to me, careful at first as they assessed the level of danger I posed to them. After a few seconds, one of them released the signature whistle, before racing forwards and swimming around me in a circle. The others followed, keen to investigate. One even swam so close that barely an inch separated my bubble from its bottlenose when it finally stopped beating its flukes. After examining me for a minute, it turned away and began waving its limbs as if trying to communicate something. I caught on quickly, and took hold of its left flipper with one hand, and its dorsal fin with the other. It instantly charged off, weaving this way and that through the blue, and laughter filled my bubble as we shot past hundreds of different kinds of fish and marine life. My head turned to look over my shoulder as I worried about losing the Cullens. Luckily, however, they were following us, maintaining between us a distance of about 20 meters, easily managing to keep up. In a few minutes, the dolphins swam to the surface, where they began performing a range of tricks, using their tail fins to dance backwards over the water. I clapped in appreciation, and they responded by swimming closer to me and making peculiar clicking noises, which I gathered to mean that they were happy with my reaction. Then, all of a sudden, they dived beneath the surface and out of sight. I ducked my head beneath the water, but they had already vanished into the blue. I lifted my face to scan the area around me. The vampires were floating a little way off, laughing gently as they looked my way. I think they've gone, I said, not bothering to shout. They'd have no trouble discerning my words. Just wait, called Alice cheerfully. Huh, what do you? I didn't have time to finish. A sudden pressure at my feet propelled me out of the water and into the air. I flew upwards in a high arc, until I was about 20 feet above the surface, before I shot downwards head first, throwing out my arms in front of me and assuming a diving position. I plummeted beneath the deep blue waves and back into the gentle calm of the colorful coral garden. I couldn't help from laughing as I broke the surface, again, causing the dolphins to swim excitedly around me. After another 15 minutes of playing, I pointed to the yacht that was still visible in the distance. Would you be able to take me there, please? I asked. I could use a rest. They seemed to understand my request, and the same dolphin that had carried me earlier swam to my side, allowing me to take hold of his flippers once again. We traveled close to the surface this time, jumping from the water every now and then as we made away. When I arrived back, I thanked the dolphins, patting each of them individually, before allowing them to dive back into the depths of the ocean. I can't believe they did that, said Rosalie once we were all back on the yacht and laying in the sun. It's not that uncommon, Carlyle smiled. Dolphins are social creatures, playful by nature. They can sense magic as well, I explained. That's why they usually approach wizards and witches. They enjoy being near to it. Who dosen tea? Emmett said absently, his attention focused on his blood-flavored lollipop. When he had bought it, initially, it had been roughly the size of a toddler's head, now at about the size of a peach, and there was no doubt in my mind that it would be entirely consumed within the next hour. I ate a few Jollibeans on the way back to the marina, and was, therefore, euphoric for the rest of our journey. I grinned blissfully as Edward gently ran his fingers back and forth over my ribs, and mentally thanked my lucky stars for giving me magical abilities. Now, whenever we wanted to spend some time alone, it would be so easy to skip from one continent to another. As my mind wandered, I considered all the places we could go in the future. Edward, yes, where are we going to go for our honeymoon? I asked, closing my eyes as I enjoyed the heat of the sun on my face. There was silence for a moment. I guess my question had surprised him. It wasn't every day that I brought up marriage-related topics, but the idea didn't really bother me at the moment. I suppose that was a side effect of the Jollibeans. Eventually, he answered, a smile audible in his voice. Where would you like to go? He asked. The sky's the limit. Somewhere hot and secluded. Hot, secluded, got it. Any ideas? I asked, my voice lazy and mellowed. A few, he answered, refusing to elaborate. Why did you bring it up? Oh, you know, I am just looking forward to it. I like being in places like this with you. You do remember that you have to get married before you can have a honeymoon. It's a small price to pay. I am sure the wedding will be great. Maybe someone should slip her some Jollibeans before she walks down the aisle, Rosalie smirked. The air seemed to sing with sound as the Cullens released a symphony of gentle laughter. My eyelids flicked as I focused in on Edward. His face was heavenly, made even more glorious by the fact that his smile was touching his eyes. I beamed. That seemed to be happening a lot lately. I drifted inside and outside of sleep the night earlier than the game. I felt like an infant earlier than Christmas morning. My thoughts just wouldn't switch off, so when I awakened at 6 on the third day in August, I figured it changed into unnecessary to attempt to fall back right into a shut-eye. Once I opened my eyes, the sky above me became a darkish pink, however it merged right into a brilliant red on the eastern aspect of the room. I couldn't believe waking up to greater beautiful colors then. Of path, I rolled in Edward's fingers and saw his striking green eyes staring into my face. I felt my forehead furrow the longer I checked out them. A thin purple line surrounded the makeup student. It became so darkish that it turned into barely visible against the blackness. I rubbed the sleep from my eyes after watching at them for some seconds. However, even if the movie had been eliminated, the crimson rim remained. Your eyes, I whispered. His reaction wasn't what I had anticipated it to be. He smiled cheekily and held makeup his right hand, wherein he held the remains of his lollipop. The sweet was pitifully small in comparison to the long stick makeup on which it become constant. They quite addictive, he explained. I bet there are lines of human blood in them. I am trusting that no one had to die for this, even though. I wager the candy man is quite committed, I smirked, although I could not assist, however feel barely repulsed by using the idea. I knew Edward felt exactly the equal approximately ordinary candies, although they sell them in Hogsmeade, too, so you'll be able to inventory makeup whilst we are at Hogwarts. He smiled widely at that, however then changed the difficulty. You were quite restless remaining night. Oh, no, what did I say? It changed into commonly about Quidditch. You stored announcing things like ship him off, ref and knock him off his broom. They have been proper approximately you, Bella, you do play dirty. It became simplest a dream, I said, the crimson unexpectedly seeping into my cheeks. Proper, he smirked, and what number of humans have you knocked off their brooms? Best 3, and that they were all Slytherins. Ah, sure, of root virtually that might advantage acts of violence, he teased, his mouth curving into a depraved smile. All of them survived, I muttered defensively. The sound of his laughter stuffed the room as he swept lower back the covers and picked me makeup away from bed. If I were human, he smirked, I would make makeup 2 times before getting on the incorrect facet of you, little witch. I couldn't assist, however giggle at that. The idea of all and sundry being scared of me was barely absurd. Edward carried me from the bedroom and along the touchdown until we reached the toilet, wherein he deposited me. What coloration would you make upon makeup? He requested, eyeing the vast brilliant faucets. Wonder me, I responded as rummaged through my toiletry kit for my toothbrush. I heard the sound of faucets being turned, which preceded the whoosh of water because it shot into the tub, although it couldn't clearly be referred to as that thinking about its size. After 2 minutes of brushing, I lowered back my matters to my bag, and became to peer what Edward had organized for me. The tub became filled with cerulean water and swirls of iridescent gold. Bubbles of both colors had been forming round the rims, quickly expanding over the floor. My heavenly boyfriend left, then, at the same time as I washed. The bath changed into adorable. Now not only was the water's makeup temperature that appeared to make my bones turn to jelly, however, also, the soothing flowery scent of roses and jasmine rose makeup and swelled through the room. No matter the exhilaration delivered on via the looming Quidditch very last, I felt myself drifting at the verge of sleep, unable to save you my eyelids from sagging as the fragrant water began taking effect. The sight of the rest room quickly turned into a series of confusing pictures. There had been people flying this way and that, excessive above the ground where I noticed myself standing. I had a broomstick too, however in contrast to the others, I was the usage of mine to batter a wasp's nest. My face, which regarded to be included with stings, possessed a manic expression. I gave the impression of a female Norman Bates, absolutely and totally deranged. I jolted wakeful on the sound of an insistent voice. "Bella, Bella, huh, what's happening?" "Bella," said Alice, who became leaning over the facet of the tub. "Are you all right?" Yeah, why? You have been in there for approximately hours. Edward and that I were shouting to you on the alternative aspect of the door, but the lavatory must be soundproof too. We couldn't even hear your heartbeat. We were starting to think you would been sucked down the plug hole." 2 hours, I exclaimed, lifting my hands from the water to discover that they had been as wrinkly as prunes. It best felt like I used to be out for makeup. She shrugged in response and nodded closer to a small pile of clothes that she had positioned on the counter. "Your matters are there. I will go away you to get modified." She left the room, and I at once shot from the water, which, extraordinarily, was still as heat as it difficult been once I had first stepped into it. I dressed unexpectedly, barely paying any interest to what Alice had selected for me. I vaguely registered that I used to be carrying a swishy, faded blue skirt and a white lace top. To skip the time until midday, the Cullens and that I played some games of Wizard's chess. All over again, the sport between Alice and Edward become the funniest, no longer due to their techniques this time, however due to the fact they by some means managed to infuriate every piece on the board. "What in Merlin's call are you doing?" cried Alice's bishop as her hand moved toward her king. "I am surrendering." "What? You can try this. We have not even misplaced a person but. This is folly. I am a psychic, recall. Think about this as me saving your ass." Her portions grumbled, but there were no greater lawsuits, aside from those on Edward's makeup, who felt as though they were cheated out of their victory. Whilst the clock sooner or later examined zone to 12, all of us walked outdoor in order that I may want to disintegrate the tent. Alice packed it away and removed the portkey even as I eliminated the enchantments I had cast makeup on the place. "This is going to be makeup," Emmett enthused. "I wonder which makeup might be playing," Rosalie questioned. "I hope the US made it through." "I do not make uppos makeup I suggest I do not think we will have. Quadpot has been the most popular wizarding recreation at domestic for some time. Quidditch is gaining recognition, however it nonetheless has to compete. There are simplest sincerely to grow makeup which have made worldwide stage the Sweetwater All-Stars for Texas and the Fitchburg Finches for Massachusetts. If Quidditch turned into as big in the States as it is far other places, I probably might have selected an American crew makeup to make makeup. "You make up a crew makeup?" Edward puzzled apparently. "Yeah, I am an Arrows fan." "Arrows, as within the Appleby Arrows," stated Emmett. I nodded, and requested, "How do you know?" "I examine Quidditch through a long time, don't forget." "You let me borrow it. What made you select the Arrows?" "Nicely. In my first year at Hogwarts, I read makeup on Quidditch because it became a huge subject matter of verbal exchange. The Montrose Magpies have been quite staggering. They have gained the league extra than another crew makeup in Ireland or Britain, however I am not keen on glory makeup. I nearly have become partial to the Holyhead Harpies, but in the end I chose the Arrows because of their victory against the Vratsa Vultures. That changed into the match that lasted 16 days. Yes, I stated eagerly. That was proper determination. Emmett and that I then released into an lively discussion approximately the make-up inside the British and Irish League, even as the others stared on, their expressions starting from amused to confused. I must admit, Emmett chuckled, I like the sound of the Falmouth Falcons. Why would not that wonder me? I laughed. Who are the Falmouth Falcons? Requested Esme. It's a southern make-up. They are quite brutal, and their motto is allow us to win, but if we can win, let us damage some heads. I am amazed you do not make up them, Edward chuckled, obviously remembering the dust that my old Quidditch buddies had spilled whilst we were at Hogwarts for the conflict. I gnawed my lower lip because the blush seeped into my cheeks. I used to be approximately to retaliate. Simplest Alice stopped me before I should get the phrases out. The portkey goes to go away in 15 seconds. Without delay, all of us raced forwards to the touch a finger to the tablecloth. I felt my heartbeat make up as I waited for pull and rush of coloration. Edward's eyes flickered to mine as we waited, and he looked as if he changed into seeking to maintain again a smile. I consider he observed something extremely funny approximately the way I and my body reacted to whatever Quidditch associated. He was possibly recalling my sleepless night time as he listened to my excited pulse. Emmett's jubilant cries echoed via the whirlwind as we had been pulled into the swirl inside the subsequent moments. I could not make out what he changed into announcing over the noise of the rush, however I may want to understand the tenor. He changed into probable even more excited than I was. I controlled to hold my stability this time as my feet collided with the floor, even though I did wobble a chunk. While I used to be convinced that I was now not so mild-headed that I used to be in hazard of collapsing, I appeared make-up to peer in which abouts we had landed. The sight alone turned into enough to inflict extra dizziness than the portkey we had been stood on a small hillock, looking onto a significant clearing OCC make-upied with the aid of hundreds of tents. Surrounding the open space changed into a thick woodland, which seemed to have crept make-up and over the mountains beyond the campsite. Bella, a voice called from someplace behind me. I spun to locate the source, and there stood a small crowd comprised usually of redheads, even though there has been one bespectacled boy with darkish, messy hair, and a girl with a mass of brown bushy tresses. Hermione. I smiled, running forwards to include her. I hugged Ginny rapidly after, and then Ron and Harry. Mr. Weasley, Charlie, Invoice and Fleur have been there too, but I saw no signal of George, Percy, or Mrs. Weasley. I would have inquired as to their absence, best I had a fairly good idea of the motive already. Mr. Weasley greeted Carlisle and Esme, whilst the others stated hello to the more youthful-looking Cullens. Fleur eyed Rosalie a touch resentfully, but politely held out her arm in make-up, which the stunning, blonde vampire everyday. Did you get the ministry tickets too? Asked Ginny. Yep, said Alice happily, they were brought to Bella. I wager the owl failed to want to come close to us. I must have lent them pig. Ron laughed, his arm slipping round Hermione's waist, who blushed gently in reaction. He is mental. We prepared on foot, heading closer to a cumbersome, crimson-faced man retaining a clipboard. G-Day, he stated in a thick Australian accent. May additionally I take your names, please. Mr. Weasley gave the wizard all our facts and thanked him as he pointed us within the course of our tenting spots. The Cullens and that I have been fortunate in that our area turned into only 3 areas far from our buddies. We surpassed others that I known, all of whom seemed to be situated nearby, which changed into maximum likely due to the fact that they too have been in ownership of government tickets. Among them, I saw Oliver Wooden, Dean Thomas, Seamus Finnegan, Luna Lovegood, Ernie Macmillan and Neville Longbottom. I smiled at the sight of Luna and her father, Xenoplilius, and assumed that they'd recently paid a go to Cotton and Tweed-S, primarily based on the fact that they were presently perched in deck chairs out of doors, a summery yellow tent with multicolored musical notes and emblems floating over the cloth. Because the music coming from inside elevated its pace, the notes commenced to fly faster and faster, until in the end the yellow areas in among were slightly seen, disappearing in the psychedelic rush of coloration. It jogged my memory of a few kind of bizarre kaleidoscope. Hello, Guy, Emmett stated, greeting Wooden as he neared our tent. They clasped arms and shook as though that they had known one another for years. Mate, Wooden nodded. How they you all been? All right, considering. Wood's brow furrowed in question. Emmett motioned his head towards me, his perpetual scapegoat, and said, Bella became the obsession of a cruel, revenge-looking for vampire who determined that the first-class manner to get around us changed into to create a navy of newborns. Wait, that become the cause for the slaughterings in Seattle. Because a person wanted to take out Bella. Even though notably amazed by using Timber's attention of occasions which had happened thousands of miles away, Emmett in reality nodded, his face becoming uncharacteristically stony. Timber's eyes widened with horror. It changed into "in the prophet," he stated, his expression becoming vacant as he cast his mind lower back. They stated that vampires were suspected to be at the foundation of it, however I simply idea it a accident that it was happening so near in which you stay. I cannot accept as true with someone might visit such extremes to settle a score, even though. What the hell did you do, Bella? She did not do something, Alice said. Victoria was James' mate, you understand, the only that tried to kill her. Yeah, I keep in mind you make up something approximately that. You took care of it, although. He appeared to Edward for confirmation, his posture visibly relaxing the instantaneous he acquired it. Properly, as a minimum it really is something. He sighed and shook his head, earlier than converting the subject of conversation to Quidditch. So, which makeup are you make makeup? We don't even know who's playing, I stated. Inside the exhilaration of seeing my friends once more, this time under some distance higher situations, I had forgotten to inquire as to who had made the very last. Wood's palms flew into the air in outrage, certainly exasperated with my lack of knowledge. Bah, I don't accept as true with this, Bella. That is unacceptable. I understand it as simply. I do not want to listen it. Spending the summer being targeted through an army of newborns isn't always an excuse. I all of a sudden felt as though I might been catapulted again in time, wherein I was receiving the same old lecture from the Gryffindor captain, being advised that handiest perfection and a fanatical technique to the game turned into proper. Virtually, Wood, now that the Cullens are in on the name of the game and there aren't any more terrorizing vampires or magical megalomaniacs at the free, I completely intend on getting my priorities back so as. His eyes narrowed as he mulled over my little speech, however, subsequently, his expression became less severe, and he inhaled a deep breath. Okay. Then, the final makeup are New Zealand and South Africa, Emmett completed, grinning widely. I concept you said you did not know. Vampire listening to, bear in mind. We located the competing UPS makeup approximately a second after we arrived. And also you couldn't have informed me. I muttered. In no way thoughts that, said Wooden, his attention constant on me. Who will you be make up? New Zealand, I stated straight away. And why's that? Because the grow makeup is splendid. Ever when you consider that Acton Fast from the Motohora Macaws have become the captain, the grow makeup's performance has been implausible. They assess the strengths and weaknesses of the opposing crew makeup to build their recreation plan. This means that they may be very hard to expect, when you consider that their strategy is never the identical. Rapid's mother is a muggle who specializes in psychology. Apparently, she and her son study every makeup in element months earlier than tournaments to gain an understanding of the gamers and their mentality. It's a very clever method. Perhaps so, Wooden nodded, but South Africa is understood for its strong offensive. They may be pretty hard. Opposing makeup New Zealand can build a sturdy defense, that one to assist them put the quaffle through the hoop. They may not be focusing on defense, I stated expectantly. That is too predictable. The South Africans could be expecting that is how anybody reacts to them, which is why they have got made the very last. If they now not going to counter the other team's makeup offense with a good defense, how do you make up they may react? Rosalie questioned, seeming to be simply as absorbed in the dialogue because the relaxation of us. Offensively, Jasper reasoned, his eyes twinkling as they focused on mine. Precisely. We smiled at every other, as if sharing a few makeup mystery. Anybody could be looking forward to them to behave in any other case. In the event that they do the opposite of what the South Africans think they may take them off defend, and due to the fact their opponents rely makeup a sturdy offense, they may make themselves inclined if forced to replace to an extra shielding approach. The brand New Zealanders, although they no longer be as strong in one location as the South Africans, are a properly rounded team. If they can pressure the opposition into protective function, they stand a chance of triumphing. If not South Africa will blow them away. As quickly as I finished voicing my theory, a A consistent smile began creeping onto Wooden's face, earlier than he laughed loudly and shook his head as though in disbelief. "You are formally forgiven," he stated. "Have I satisfactorily convinced you of my loyalty to the game, then?" "Yep." I rolled my eyes and chuckled. "You would make a fitting popular, Bella," Jasper remarked, his eyes flicking to Edward, who had listened at some point of the entire sports activities associated debate with a look of unshakable entertainment. "That is Quidditch, Jasper, not conflict," I reminded him. "Method as strategy," he shrugged. "If you know a way to apply it to one, you can discover ways to achieve this for the opposite. Sport is only a less extreme model of fight." After Wooden had long passed on his way to greet some of his antique college companions, Alice and I embellished the out-of-doors of the portable domestic with banners. The brand New Zealand flag was draped over the pinnacle. After both Jasper and I had proclaimed our guide makeup for Australia's neighbors, the others had followed match. The best man or woman seeming to have issue with the selection became Emmett. The offensive methods of the South African aspect have been greater his fashion, but he was nonetheless inspired through the opposing makeup's flexibility. Ultimately, he took brains over brawn just like the relaxation folks. I had additionally connected my Appleby Arrows banner to the front of the tent, simply above the doorway in my determination to advertise makeup, my favored Quidditch makeup. When that changed into performed, we made our manner over to the Weasley tent where we have been invited interior via Mr. Weasley. Neither the outdoors or indoors were anywhere close to as extravagant as the tent owned with the aid of the vampires, but it clearly had a sure homey appeal about it. The antique fixtures was mismatched in terms of style, though the colors running for the duration of had been all produced from rich, warm reds, browns, and oranges. Hermione was magically adorning Ron with paint, so that his face flashed each 5 seconds from the blue, white, and red of the New Zealand flag, to the black, yellow, green, white, blue, and pink of South Africa. "What is the matter, Ron?" laughed Emmett. "Do not know in which your loyalties lie." "He's conflicted," Harry stated in mock seriousness. "Who you make up?" Ginny requested. She already had small New Zealand flags on either cheek. "Equal as you," Alice sang, skipping towards the girls and sitting on the stool where Ron had been sat handiest moments earlier than. Ginny laughed and started working. Before lengthy, all our faces were blanketed in paint, apart from Mr. Weasley, Carlisle and Esme, every of whom had kindly refused the offer for a Quidditch fashion makeover. The boys had flags painted on either cheek, even though Alice and Rosalie handiest had one on the alternative, they'd silver and blue stars. I, however, had a flag and 2 silver arrows. Alice, who changed into nevertheless taking delight in controlling my look, rushed from the tent, most effective to go back after a minute with a small zip makeup bag, from which she extracted electric-powered blue eyeshadow, black eyeliner, mascara, and a scarlet lipstick. "You know the drill, Bella," she chirped, handing me the package, "and that I's makeup cobalt makeup have to do the trick." "Matter to 10, I informed myself, repeating the coaching over and over in my head. Even though I was barely irked by using the reality that Alice turned into forcing me to exchange myself physically simply so that I ought to attain the correct shade coordination, Edward regarded to experience the very last final results. I assume he had an aspect for vivid purple lips, due to the fact more than once I observed his eyes lingering on my mouth. I flashed him an extensive smile, and his eyes became glassy for the briefest second, before he gave into excessive blinking. I tried to cover my entertainment, however one small snigger escaped, causing my spell on Edward makeup. His lips unfold into my favored crooked smile, and makeup the hypnotic enchantment had been reversed back on me. Finally, I managed to make makeup free of the effect that his splendor had on me, and quickly averted my eyes, now not looking the others to seize me gawking like an fool. Ron turned into informing Emmett and Jasper of the latest Fitz main as much as the final. England made it to the sector finals, but we lost to Germany. "And what approximately the US?" asked Jasper. "Knocked out inside the 2D spherical through Uruguay," Ron said apologetically. "Usual," Emmett grumbled, shaking his head. We all soon left the safe haven of the tent to move exploring. It wasn't too tough to figure out when we had entered New Zealand territory. Amidst the consistent blues, reds, and white have been dozens of various types of distinguished animals. Koalas have been climbing over the tents, while splendidly colored parrots flew this way and that. We didn't linger long in that unique area for two motives. First off, the Cullens had been having their regular effect, inflicting the animals to grow to be agitated, which, in turn, ended in a refrain of loud squawking. Secondly, the brand New Zealanders eyed Ron threateningly each time his face paint switched to enemy colors. Possibly you must choose a aspect already, Ron, Ginny said as we activate strolling back. I'd if it weren't so bloody complicated. I experience like I am seeking to pick out among losing my left arm or my properly. It truly is a bit of a make-up silly analogy, Charlie smirked, thinking about you proper surpassed. Very well, permit us pretend I am ambidextrous. Then what? Maintain the only with the maximum muscle. Ron went silent as he mulled over his brother's inspiration. Then, after a second of deliberation, he introduced the crew makeup. He could be make-upwarding makeup. South Africa it is. Ron, you not possible, Hermione stated, even though she sounded greater amused than annoyed as she wound an arm round his waist. He smiled extensively at her and pulled her nearer, his arm draping over her shoulder. Harry Speedy brought makeup the situation of Hogwarts. I suspected he nonetheless felt a touch awkward on every occasion he changed into offered with the sight of his two pleasant buddies snuggling closely collectively. I may want to keep in mind that despite the fact that we had all realized a long time ago that Ron and Hermione preferred one another in a manner that went beyond friendship, it nevertheless felt slightly bizarre seeing them collectively as a pair after years of bickering. I used to be intensely happy that it had subsequently occurred, but it would take some time to sink in. We all going? I smiled, indicating the Cullens. Esme and Carlisle are going to be sharing Muggle studies this 12 months. Truly, Ginny stated, amazed. She regarded to Esme for confirmation, and grinned broadly whilst she acquired it. Wow, that's terrific. Yeah, Ron agreed. Now we've got a person which could provide Gryffindor hundreds of residence points and sap them from Slytherin. Ha ha ha, Emmett boomed, his eyes on me. Esme giggled behind her hand, certainly remembering the same commentary I had made following McGonagall's visit. You all have a one music thoughts, do not you? Edward chortled. We cannot assist it, Harry laughed. It's ingrained. It's simply something that I ended all of sudden, having simply caught sight of our tent. I felt my belly clench and my blood boil with anger, my coronary heart starting to race as thoughts of revenge and justice instantly crashed via my mind. My jaw clenched as I floored my tooth in fury, because there, striking over the entrance, become incisable, buzzing wasp's nest, the citizens of which were flying around the perimeter as if that they had claimed the tent for themselves and were trying to shield it against threats. Bella, there you cried Dean, jogging forwards with Seamus to satisfy us. He pointed over his shoulder towards the hive. I do not know who did it, however whoever it turned into, they needed to have put it there recently. We only went interior for 5 minutes, and while we came out, there it was. However, why could someone randomly target our tent? Carlisle requested, absolutely at a loss for words by the idea. I would have attempted to give an explanation for, only I used to be so beyond angry that I doubted I were able to get the words out. They probably might have converted into something incomprehensible and animalistic. It wasn't random, Emmett growled. How do you understand? Requested Esme. Due to the fact it might be an excessive amount of an accident for someone to randomly stick a wasp's nest on pinnacle of an arrow fan's tent, defined Seamus. The Appleby arrows and the Wimborne wasps hate each other, Dean continued. It is almost as terrible as the enmity among West Ham and Millwall. You always must convey ruddy soccer into it, Don T.U. Ron sighed, shaking his head. I am simply announcing I know how Bella feels. If you need help getting them returned, Bells, I am in. Me too, stated Emmett, rubbing his arms collectively. I cannot allow this slide. What are you making plans on doing? Edward asked, difficulty coloring his tone. Not anything with a view to harm them bodily, I stated silkily, resuming my stroll. I'll dispose of the nest, Hermione stated, extracting her wand from her pocket. Wingardium Leviosa. The nest rose into the air, the humming scouts following their domestic as Hermione guided it over the camp closer to the timber. Whilst it turned into secure to go into, I marched in her and make up the stairs. I heard the gasps of the humans as they observed us in, seeing the make-up indoors for the first time. I rushed quickly into Edward's room and over to the wardrobe in which I had laid the gathering of candy the Cullens were kind sufficient to shop for me. Swiftly establishing the container of jungle jellies, I rummaged through for one with the embossed picture of a tiger. Once I had discovered it, I headed over to the mirror and took out my wand to take away the paint and B6FD8D88D79 Ed1018DF623DOB49E84E7 adorning my visage. Next, I transfigured my skin, smiling because the coloration absolutely drained from each inch of my face and frame. When I was as faded as Edward and his family, I turned my attention to my eyes, considering whether pink or gold will be the best. In the end I went for pink if I was aiming to mentally disturb the mystery idiots. I figured I may also as properly do it thoroughly. Then I flicked my wand at the cosmetics Alice had left for me, remaining my eyes and looking ahead to the black shimmery cloud to decide my face. After I opened my eyes and peered at my reflection, I hardly ever known myself. My eyes had been in stark comparison with my skin, like onyx and blood-red rubies in opposition to snow. I had also controlled to show my tooth a blinding coloration of white that they had already been a nice milky color beforehand, however now they seemed unnatural of their perfection. I may want to easily have passed for a member of the Volturi. As soon as I had fixed my hair, I opted for an exchange of outfit. Swishy skirts and lace may want to infrequently be classed as terrifying. I finished makeup in a decent, black leggings, darkish-heeled ankle boots which would virtually kill me, and a black, sequined, off-the-shoulder top. I positioned the jungle jelly in my pocket with my wand and left the room to move downstairs. Ron turned into explaining the reason for the detest between the two British Quidditch make-up when I made my look. Edward's eyes flicked to me as I made my entrance. His double take was so rapid that it turned into nearly a blur. I smiled in pride as his jaw dropped. The room fell quiet as the others took in my look, each of them staring on in disbelief. Seamus broke the silence and said, "I make makeup we were truly wondering alongside the strains of a dung bomb, Bella." He lifted a hand, commencing his palm to reveal a boxed Weasley product. "As a way to help, truly," I stated, stepping forwards to just accept the makeup line. "Thanks, I will buy you some candy later." "No worries," he laughed. "So long as I am getting to look you teaching the wasps a lesson I'll call it even." Now, Bella," Mr. Weasley advised, "don't do something it really is going to get everybody hurt." "I am no longer going to harm everybody, Mr. Weasley," I announced optimistically as I walked closer to the exit. "I am just going to convince a few cretins that it is not best or clever to disenchanted avid Arrows fan." Because I had genuinely no concept how to find the one accountable for the effortlessly located hive, Emmett and Edward stepped in to hint the enemy fragrance. It would have been a sarcasm to mention that I attracted a few glances as we walked along the rows of tents. No longer that I ought to blame anybody, my vivid purple eyes have been enough to offer all of us the chills. Sooner or later, the main vampires got here to a halt as we reached the brink of the camp. All of us knew that they depositioned the correct tent, because a Wimborne wasp flag were raised above it, draped proudly beside the South African sign. Fortunately for me, I was out of the solar status in the shadows forged with the aid of the massive trees, so I did not provide myself away. My head grew to examine my pals, who had been standing approximately 10 meters away, poking their heads out from behind another tent. Alice was attempting her pleasant not to giggle, as was Jasper, who seemed to find it hilarious that I might be completely incensed by way of a rival Quidditch fan. I inhaled sharply, taking the candy from my pocket and sticking it to the roof of my mouth. Earlier than I opened the box in my hand and hurled the bomb via the outlet inside the tent. After what could have most effective been some seconds, I discerned yells of disgust coming from within, which got louder and louder as the OCC make you pants ran within the path of clean air. They came crashing out into the open, gasping for breath, and that I most effective just controlled to stop my eyes from bugging out when I realized who they had been. Nicely, well," I murmured, trying to mimic the way Edward spoke the extraordinary purr that could only be defined as velvet. "It smiles a small international, isn't always it. I wasn't looking ahead to run into you three. B. Bella," stuttered Blaze, the Slytherin whom had spent the complete 6th year scowling at me inside the slug membership. I smiled wickedly, revealing my threatening, snowy white tooth. "Urquhart and Warrington, my vintage Quidditch opponents, have been there, too." All of them seemed on fearfully as they took in my appearance. This could not be any more perfect. What are you doing here? Warrington gulped, his face taking over a sickly, pallid tone. Properly, I purred, staring at makeup from under my lashes. I just desired to thanks for the present you left above our tent. I had no concept you were stingers. The three remained silent, their eyes transferring from me to Edward and Emmett, their expressions turning into even greater terrified as they accessed the greater intimidating pair. Subsequently, Blaze appeared to locate his voice, even though it became a bit better than usual. We failed to comprehend it became why your tent. I don't find that hard to believe. I nodded, understanding that the Slytherins might never have dared to perform one of these prank on a set of vampires. But now that you understand, I stated, taking a few steps forwards, I believe that we ought to pay you any other go-to. They shook their heads vigorously in solution, their eyes extensive and chests heaving with the push of adrenaline. Good. Now, makeup you should move slowly again into your pungent, little hole. It is a good deal more secure in there than it is miles for you out right here. I am sure they desired not anything extra than to follow my recommendation, however they have been every frozen with terror, unable to transport their limbs as they stared into the eyes of what they believed to be a bloodthirsty predator. That was after I used my tongue to peel the jungle jelly from the roof of my mouth. I swallowed it without chewing and, inside the subsequent instantaneous, launched a deafening, primal roar. The three boys screamed in horror, stumbling backwards in their tries to escape. Quick! Urquhart screamed, pushing Blaze back into the putrid tent, which I am certain changed into actually optimum to being outside with me at that factor, as far as they have been involved at the least. The second one they disappeared inside, a refrain of laughter crammed the air. Emmett became on his knees, shaking silently, at the same time as the others clutched their stomachs, guffawing hysterically. Tears were rolling down Seamus and Ron's faces, and once they had regained a few measure of manage, they started cheering loudly, clapping their appreciation. Edward, too, turned into having issue containing his entertainment. He gently grasped my hand and pulled me to him, lifting me off the floor so that my legs have been secured round his waist. How did you try this? He requested, his eyes glowing with awe. Do what? Roar. You appeared like a tiger or something. It become one of those jungle jellies that Rosalie offered me at Uluru. They may be pretty amazing, are not they? The entirety about that changed into make you perp, he murmured, his lips urgent in opposition to my jaw. That changed into truly very horny, Bella. I blushed profusely. It wasn't very often I heard that particular phrase carried out to me. Usually, Edward's description ranged from stunning to make up makeup, but horny hadn't exactly been famous in early 20th century vocabulary plus, I may want to hardly ever consider myself as such, so I could not count on someone as beautiful as Edward to either. The reality that he had said it even as I was wearing my vampire hide only fueled my preference for his venom. That turned into splendid, Bella. Ginny giggled. It become extra than extremely good, Jasper stated, you scared them witless. You ought to have heard their heartbeats, Edward grinned. I do not make uppos makeup they could be defined as beats, smirked Emmett. They have been a touch speedy for that. Maybe hum is a more fitting word. I laughed as Edward diminished me lower back to the floor, understanding that this will be one of these times that I desperately wanted to have engraved make upon my memory for the relaxation of eternity. There have been few sounds as lovely to my ears as Blaze's girly squeals. As we walked return to our spot, I transfigured my eyes again to their herbal color, in conjunction with my skin. Already the sun beginning to slink behind the timber. The day turned into passing so quick. We all spent the rest of the lead makeup in the predominant room of the Cullen tent. Luna and Neville joined us, too, an awful lot to Emmett's pride. He found Luna even extra enjoyable than he did me, and become curious about her eccentricities. Edward and I had opposition to discover who may want to produce the loudest and most stunning roar. Shivers ran down my backbone whenever he unleashed the feral sound. I knew it ought to have induced a few sort of herbal fear, but it did not anything. Instincts for self-renovation makeup I can also have had. They have been absolutely overshadowed by way of an overt physical enchantment of bodily magnetism that became nearly not possible to withstand. Fighting the pull changed into like seeking to wade towards the current of surging mountain rapids. The most effective thing that kept me from launching myself at him changed into the truth that we have been situated in a room full of people. The appearance in his eyes made me trust that he was questioning the same. Ultimately, But, Mr. Weasley introduced that it was time to make our way over to the pitch, which gave me a terrific distraction from the fire that were building in the pit of my stomach. It took us at the least 20 minutes to attain the destination point we needed to first trek via the woodland and over a towering hill. The Cullens were not the only ones who gasped once they saw the sight after we reached the height. I, additionally, changed into astounded by using the spectacle. We determined ourselves searching out onto a great tree-covered basin, inside the middle of which stood an enormous oval stadium. In phrases of height, it did not make makeup that some distance above the ground, for it descended deep into the earth as an alternative, meaning that the perimeters have been nearly absolutely vertical. My God, Carlyle murmured. What number of does it seat? Rosalie requested, as gobsmacked as her father. 170,000, stated Mr. Weasley, who became bobbing on his feet. The Australians have outdone themselves this time. That they had it completed in 14 months, and they handiest had 200 extra people than we did 4 years in the past. Pretty outstanding makeup, thinking about our stadium held 70,000 much less and took 1 year to make. How many people did you use? Esme questioned softly. About 500. Carlyle's eyes bulged at Mr. Weasley's blasé tone. Proper. Come on youngsters. We followed Mr. Weasley until we reached the stadium. It became simply as make-up from the outdoor because it changed into on the inner. The partitions had been manufactured from silver and blue gold, and there have been strains of sapphires lining each front. A wizard checked our tickets simply as we handed under one of the jewel-encrusted archways and pointed us inside the course of our seats. Harry, Hermione and the Weasleys were seated without delay. Subsequent to us they had been through the Hogwarts personnel makeup, Kingsley Shacklebolt, and makeup of different very important-looking officials about 10 locations away. To our proper have been Seamus and Dean. To our left have been Wooden, Angelina Johnson, and Katie Bell. Every seat came with a blue silk-covered program. Similarly, there were silver buckets constructed into the seats of the cushioned armrest, which held an assortment of factors, which include distinct varieties of candy and magical omnioculars. I like executive seats, cried Seamus as he rummaged through the bucket and pulled out a caramel snake. He jerked as it slithered make up his arm and over his neck, creeping over his skin till its head became immediately in the front of his lips. He chuckled, before beginning his mouth and allowing the golden sweet reptile to wriggle inside. The Australians had been type sufficient to deal with the Cullens with a ramification of blood-flavored chocolates. There have been even slow-melting scarlet popsicles, which each of the vampires began sucking furiously. These sincerely feel pretty icy to me, Edward beamed. No wonder they may be gradual melting. I wonder what temperature they are. Precisely 100 levels above absolute zero, stated an unusual voice from in the back of. I spun and saw a person wearing emerald gowns with gold trim. I estimated that he was roughly in his mid-40s. He had wavy blonde hair that fell to his shoulders, and although his attire protected his frame, it wasn't tough to make out that he turned into insuitable form. Felix Dodger, he said, protecting out his hand to Edward, who took it without hesitating, head of branch of video games and sports activities of the Australian Ministry for Magic. It is a delight to satisfy you. You must be the Cullens. Sure. Edward checked out the person questioningly. Oh, don't worry, mate, smiled Felix. I made a point of memorizing the seating plan for the government container, considering that is wherein I'll be spending the evening. How's the lollies? Very satisfactory, thanks. Make you burp. We were not certain what to reserve whilst we had been instructed to count on our own family of vamps. I had one of the blokes inside the ministry make a experience to lollipockets in Uluru to invite the owner for advice. He counseled blood-flavored lollipops, however it seemed a chunk of a shame to make up you with simplest one type of sweet whilst us humans have a lot more to pick out from. No, the lollies are cute, Esme said clearly. We would by no means been capable of have sweet till we got here right here. However you like the frozen ones. She smiled and nodded. Well, it's a remedy. We needed to have them mainly made and listed the assist of a vampire to assist us discern out if we would got the proper temperature. He's an alright fella, bit of a bushy generally, but we caught him 10 clicks outdoor of Sydney. He's friendly sufficient, even though. Lives off dragon's blood, which jogs my memory. He signaled a gangly younger wizard standing beside a silver trolley a bit way away. Derek, could we got the billy, please? The man, who changed into wearing bright blue robes, started out walking briskly toward us, pushing the trolley all of the whilst. He reached for a big china teapot, but Felix beat him to it. "It is all right, Derek, I will do it." He took hold of his wand and gave a rapid flick, conjuring 7 china teak makeups and matching saucers. The strange guy then proceeded to tip the teapot's contents into each sea makeup. I bit back a chuckle because the pink steaming liquid poured from the sprout. I might never have imagined that vampires ought to dine in such a sophisticated manner. It seemed barely absurd for creatures that have been used to taking their meals uncooked. "We were instructed you pick it heat." The inflection in Felix's statement suggested that it were greater of a question. I noticed his posture relaxing barely because the Cullens nodded in thanks. "Good, correct." He waved his wand another time, causing the sea makeups to glide through the air, 1 to each vampire. He then asked how antique I used to be. I told him that I was 18, and he straightaway reacted by means of handing me a glass of strong-smelling stuff which he had taken from the trolley. I sniffed at it tentatively. "So, what is a bunch makeup o' Yankees doing mingling with the pommies?" Felix nodded his head along the line of college students, smiling mischievously as he did so. "Bella," Edward chuckled, his hand locating mine, clearly amused with the aid of the Australian's cheeky manner, "is a makeup at Hogwarts. She moved to England with her mom whilst she was younger." "Ah, I see. Have been you a member of Dumbledore's army, pass over?" "Sure," I stated, amazed. "How do you already know about Dumbledore's army?" He laughed loudly at that. "Who doesn't realize about it? The whole International has heard of that unique make-up organization of rebels. Each wizarding paper throughout the globe became reporting information approximately the day and the Order of the Phoenix after the downfall of, well, you understand. Exact Anya, that's all I am able to say. In any case, I would hire be off. This is Agano Joybell, over there," he stated, pointing to a cheerful-looking man in orange gowns. I acknowledged the name. It belonged to the British head of Department of Games and Sports Activities, the identical guy who had sent us the tickets. "He will be wanting a word." It changed into "very nice to satisfy you all." Hooroo. And stale he skipped, earlier than we even had the chance to say goodbye. Felix Dodger stated Wood, who had in reality been listening in. He used to be the seeker for the Wollongong Warriors. He was the first rate in the global at one time. In fact, he becomes so excellent that the beaters in nearly every grow make makeup used to spend the match focusing absolutely on him, continually seeking to knock him off his broom and usually failing. He changed into too agile for them, and while they had been pre-makeupied with him, the warrior chasers stored placing the quaffle through the hoops. It's no surprise absolutely that they continuously dominated the Australian League whilst he changed into with them. They have been gutted while he retired. I grew to become my head to find the man of topic, and felt my forehead furrow as tested him. He simply did not appear like a seeker. He was too bulky, too tall and muscular. He should had been in clean goal for bludgers. Even as I continued my pondering, I absently took a sip of the amber substance in my hand. The second one I swallowed, I began coughing closely. I hadn't anticipated the wave of warmth that had hit the again of my throat. It was the sort of burn that might most effective be attributed to fire whiskey. I had in no way tried it formerly, but I knew from Seamus' descriptions precisely what it tasted like. Warmth commenced constructing in my stomach, and slowly unfold through my entire system, filling me with an abnormal self-belief. I quick took every other sip, this time savoring the sensation as the liquid exceeded over my tongue. My eyes flicked back to the Cullens, and that I couldn't assist but shake with silent laughter as I stuck sight of Jasper. He changed into protecting his saucer and lifting the teak makeup to his lips. Along with his best posture and sleek actions, he seemed extra like a proper English toff than the ravenous vampire who had as soon as tried to kill me. "What's so humorous, Bella?" he asked without turning his head, without a doubt having picked makeup on my temper. "Oh, nothing," I spoke back step by step. "I used to be simply questioning that you jogged my memory of Vivian Ward." In my periphery, I observed Alice, Rosalie, Esme, and Carlyle jerk in their chairs. When I grew to become my head, I noticed that they have been giggling into their sea makeups, whilst the Cullen boys looked confused. Edward turned his head to look at others, and then he, too, began shaking with silent laughter. "Who is Vivian Ward?" asked Emmett. You know she's performed by using Julia Roberts, the streetwalker that becomes a respectable girl. There has been a quick moment of silence. Earlier than Jasper's eyes grew to become incredulous and he shouted, "You re-comparing me to quite female. Could you decide on my honest girl?" Emmett's amusement turned into a ways much less subtle than that of the others. It changed into relatively loud and attracted curious glances from those sat close by. Jasper sniffed and Speedy grew to become his head far away from me. Then he brought the sea makeup returned to his lips and took some other sip. "Bella," he stated evenly, "just due to the fact I don't have any choice to chunk you at present, it would not imply that it is past me. That wouldn't be a totally gentlemanly issue to do." I chuckled, unable to prevent my lips from twitching into a smile. "I thought you were an elegant vampire in recent times." His mouth unfolded into a huge grin as he grew to become to study me. He probably might have challenged my joke. Handiest I think he turned into playing the idea of ultimately being in control of his thirst far in excessive amount of for that. "I am, or not I?" He smirked. "A pretty, delicate vampire," Emmett mocked. "Although I do not make you re a woman simply but by means of all manner, hold trying, though." Jasper turned into approximately to retort, but he became distracted with the aid of the loud, jovial voice of Felix Dodger because it echoed across the stadium. "Ladies and gents, welcome to the final of the 421-3 Quidditch International Sea Makeup. I realize that tonight may be a night time to don't forget, due to the fact, in the end, that is Australia." Cheers and clapping exploded through the area, and my coronary heart makeup began thumping quicker and quicker in opposition to my ribcage. Edward's head became to me and he flashed the heavenly, crooked smile, pleased, I thought, with my happiness. He added the hand he was keeping to his lips, lightly kissing the back of it, his eyes never leaving mine. Even though it appeared impossible, my heartbeat extended in addition in my chest. I became my head just in time to see the gigantic board advertising Boticati's Operline switch in order that it examined New Zealand 0, South Africa 0. "Now, please, position your palms collectively for the brand New Zealand makeup mascots." The left-hand side of the stadium, the section akin to an excited sea of blue, become full of makeup standing witches and wizard, nearly all of whom seemed to be screaming and jumping head over heels in their anticipation. The second one, Felix, fell quiet, loud. Vivacious track started blaring throughout the stadium, welcoming the flares of color that got here shooting overhead. At the start, I idea they need to have been fireworks of a few kinds, smoky jets ranging from scarlet to indigo, like something you'll anticipate to look coming out of the lower back of a purple aerobatic aircraft. But when I peered through the omnioculars with which I have been makeup, I saw that there had been actual people driving the rainbow, all of whom were sporting lengthy, silver poles. They raised them into the air in unison, unfurling an army of vast flags bearing the brand New Zealand layout, thereby earning every other surge of cheers. The second the blues, reds and whites commenced blowing in the wind, the rainbow steams morphed into the most notable animals, even though they didn't seem absolutely full size. There have been crimson, fearsome oxen which went stampeding through the air, no longer seeming to trouble themselves with the fact that they were wingless. Huge orange, misty tigers went charging beside them. Next to the ones changed into a flock of outstanding yellow phoenixes, each the scale of a baby elephant. Then there had been outstanding emerald dragons, sapphire orcas, indigo stallions, and, finally, violet wolves. "Totems," I cried, losing the omnioculars from my face. "Totems," stated Carlyle, "as in animal spirits." I nodded. "They are able to alternate their shape and substance with a purpose to combination in with nature. It is why a few people believe they created the sector. They make up that every tree and mountain has a spirit or is a spirit." When the totems had rotated the arena, they released a sequence of noises makeup, forming a music that became each haunting and galvanizing within the same moment. Amongst the sounds, I distinguished the cry of the orcas, the roar of the tigers, and the howling of the wolves. All of them swooped down together in the direction of the pitch, in no way slowing once, even when their riders swung their legs to leap off. The instant the animals had been loose, they separated and flew off in distinct directions, some shooting makeupwards, others keeping near the ground. Then, without warning, they exploded into new shapes, though their colorations remained simply as rich and first-rate. I stared in amazement at the scene beneath me. It changed into like a miniature version of a few lovely New Zealand pudding, a tiny paradise constructed from a stunning lake, misty clouds that hovered midway make up the snow-capped, indigo mountains, thick emerald grass scattered with flowers of each coloration and boulders, and tall leafy trees which stuffed out the empty areas. Excellent, whispered Esme. It's beautiful, Rosalie sighed. In my view, turned into beyond phrases all I knew become that I desperately desired to go to the actual component, and as the tune of the totems continued, it became as if my soul changed into singing, too. I felt simply excellent. Mind of the brand New Zealand Grow Make makeup permeated my mind till, ultimately, my mind became so beaten that I couldn't even bear in mind the rival makeup's call. Who are they playing again? I requested Edward. He looked at me and blinked a few times, before managing to get out the words, Air South Africa. The opposite vampires, too, seemed a little unsure, and despite the fact that they failed to appear to be as significantly influenced by using totem magic as the rest of us, it really regarded to affect them. Oh, where's that? It's in New Zealand, Wooden said absently. No, IIS make makeup it's in Africa. A furrow appeared among Edward's eyes and he commenced shaking his head vigorously, as if there has been something lodged in his skull that had no right in being there. Yes, I am positive it is. It is on the African continent. Ah, yes, I remember now. In reality, I couldn't forget an aspect. Someplace in the back of my mind, I registered that I had heard of Africa earlier then, but my preceding information of the USA became eluding me. The instant the totems ended their track and soared in the direction of the blue 1-2 of the stadium, all of it came flooding lower back. Edward became right. South Africa changed into definitely not in New Zealand. Properly, that became odd, he said. Peculiar. Alice chuckled. It truly is a piece of an underestimation. While become the final time you ever forgot something, Edward? Approximately 90 years in the past, he smirked. Now, cried Felix, regaining our attention, please make up lead makeup for the South African Grow Make makeup mascots. The proper half of the area went definitely wild. Once I seen through my omnioculars, they looked like they have been screaming as if their lives trusted it. One man I stuck sight of became chanting so loudly that he went blue in the face, and seemed as if he was about to faint. I grew to become my attention to the side of the stadium directly contrary the Cullens and I, because there, swarming over the whole southern facet, changed into a thick wall of fast transferring mist. It shimmered inside the most first-rate manner, like a few form of visually enhanced, earthbound nebula fuchsia merging into crimson, clashing with surprising cobalt and tender blues. What are they? Asked Jasper, who turned into now leaning forwards in his seat. A Badwa, is make makeup, Carlyle murmured, his eyes skilled on the cloud. Something right now clicked at the sighting makeup of the call we had learnt about the Abatwa fairies in care of magical creatures, even though Hagrid had only in reality referred to them in passing, giving us a vague outline of the regions they have been found in and how to act if you got here across one. I peered through my omnioculars at the spreading haze and, positive sufficient, Carlyle became proper. Hundreds of thousands and tens of millions of tiny, little people have been flying through the air, seated at the return of beautifully colored bugs. They arrive from Zulu mythology, though I do not make up I can actually use that word anymore. Critically, Carlyle, Rosalie laughed, the simplest element that can be defined as mythical anymore is the meaning of the word legendary if that makes any sense in any respect. I don't think it does, he smirked, however I understand what you are announcing, unusually sufficient. The Abatwa fairies had been nicely synchronized in their performance. They all worked collectively to shape the most make-superb photographs, ranging from the flag in theirs of it to giant 3D portrayals of African dancers, all of which moved to the beat of the music throughout the length of the pitch. That was appropriate, Alice sang, clapping her hands in appreciation, but I assume I make up the totems. I would not say that just but, I smirked, having a reasonably exact concept what became coming subsequent. She checked out me questioningly, her expression slightly angry. Alice had remained actual to her word and had now not glimpsed any further than our ultimate day in Burley Heads. Even though I was having fun watching her experience constant wonder, she turned into really pissed off with the concept of no longer knowing what the future had in keep. While the fairy dance become over, the photo transformed into that of a massive bow and arrow, which soared around the brink of the arena. The string progressively pulled back, in the end liberating and taking pictures the missile forth. Before realized what become happening, hundreds of thousands of tiny diamonds started descending like rain. It needed to had been the maximum pricey and beautiful hailstorm in records. Are the ones what I make makeup they are. Alice screamed manically. Diamonds. Rosalie squealed, her hands furiously snatching at the falling jewels. Right away, the others commenced repeating the equal actions, hoping to bag as a few of the precious stones as feasible. Emmett ended makeup lifting his blouse half of way make up his torso, using it as he could a net. Fortunately, I managed to capture one diamond because it fell through the air, which changed into more than enough for me. Woo! Seamus cried as he tested the few stones he had gained. The Cullens, way to their awesome eyesight and reflexes, together ended makeup with 156 diamonds. I wouldn't get excited, Angelina sighed, unable to rip her eyes far away from her captures. They are in all likelihood exactly similar to leprechaun gold. I guess they will all have disappeared in an hour. They may not, I said with a bit of luck. In comes hopeful glances from the ones surrounding me. Abadwa diamonds are real enough. In reality, they re the most precious diamonds in the global, given that they weigh very few impurities. The fairy people cut them to form and use them to distract muggles who get too close, with a view to fly away. Then, whilst the muggles are asleep or looking within the contrary course, they sneak in and scouse borrow them back. In line with Hagrid, that advanced into a brand new subculture. When the Abadwa king or queen begins entering the final stages of their lives, they order tens of millions of diamonds to be scattered over the land then, after 3 months, the fairy human being separate to go and hunt down the diamonds. They said to have a sixth feel for finding them, which means that they could song them to any place they've been shipped, although that happens to be on the opposite side of the world. They can usually realize their personal stuff, as well, so they cannot cheat. The male and female that retrieve the maximum diamonds emerge as make up the heirs to the throne, which is why most effective single Abadwa are allowed to compete. Of direction, the truth that the diamonds vanish without caution manner that they cannot be traded in the wizarding global. Buying them is far too volatile. Depending on your moral sense, you can usually recall promoting them to muggles. Or you can simply revel in them even as you've got them. Angelina smiled widely. Then, I bet that does not sound so terrible. How long do you observe we have? 3 months at the least, I shrugged. Brilliant. I like the ABATWA. Alice cried blissfully, loading the diamonds into her pocket. They in all likelihood might not even try to reclaim them from us, not if they may be like most beings and creatures. That relies makeup on how a good deal they need to rule, I laughed. The colorful fairy cloud moved off to the aspect of the pitch, then, happy that they had turned a suitable portion of the previously neutral spectators. Long stay Africa, I heard Ron shout. He was leaning over the railing, waving his palms like a crazy man or woman. And now, cried the magically magnified voice of Felix Dodger, please position your wands within the air for New Zealand's countrywide Quidditch make-up. Presenting Lawrence, a discern in sapphire Quidditch gowns came shooting out from the sheltered hall far below. The entire factor changed into so fast that the man gave the impression of nothing greater than a streak of blue. The left half of the stadium went wild. Bray. The subsequent flash of blue shot into the air. Kobe, Harkham, Hardy, Esplin, and quick. There he is, screamed Timber. That is him. It really is Swift. In his pleasure, Wood clutched at the blouse overlaying Emmett's left shoulder and started out shaking it vigorously. Emmett did not seem to observe he, too, turned into yelling in pleasure. Now that the entire New Zealand team became makeup inside the air, all of them turned around the area, each acting the maximum tremendous acrobatics. Speedy rocketed through the air like a bullet, and as soon as he had succeeded in achieving the Firebolt's complete pace, he pulled the broom out from beneath himself and flipped forwards into a tumbling somersault, spinning like a Catherine wheel till he become no extra than 20 toes above the floor, which become when he crammed the broom again between his legs and fired make-upwards. I slightly registered that I was screaming, now, as properly, but the sound of Edward's loud laughter brought me return to my senses. I couldn't assist but blush. Dude, I heard Emmett say while the make-up's overall performance had ended. Oh, sorry, Wood apologized, ceasing his grip on the burly vampire. And now, ladies and gents, kindly greet the South African country-wide Quidditch make-up. I come make make-up marks. Outsoared the first player, in gowns of black and gold to a deafening applause. He, too, become using a firebolt, which, make make-up, turned into best to be predicted considering that this turned into the final and the model were available on the market for years. Symes, Ezel, Zweig, Merrick, Vosloo, and Vivier. The South Africans shot around the stadium like 7 missiles. They flew so near the stands that they were nearly in reaching distance once they exceeded. If I had extended my arm and leaned as some distance forwards as turned into feasible without falling, they could without problems have taken my arm off with the speed at which they flew. Their show became fantastic, flawlessly coordinated in each manner. They moved with the agility and precision of fighter jets. Possibly they had taken a number of their inspiration from Muggle Air Force shows. Their actions were truly less extravagant than those of their rivals, however that failed to mean they have been less impressive. The South Africans achieved a united hammerhead, flying make upwards in a vertical ascent, before shooting go into reverse in a parallel line. The complete component turned into best, instantly conveying the impact of electricity and effortlessness. Perhaps I had been incorrect to make up that New Zealand could win. South Africa changed into by using some distance the greater intimidating side. Their make upwarders in reality seemed to assume so they had been screaming their hearts out, as a ways as I may want to tell. And, subsequently, please welcome return to the arena Seamake-up acclaimed chairwizard of the Global Association of Quidditch our referee Hassan Mustafa. A tiny, scrawny wizard with a bald head and mustache got here strolling onto the pitch to a spherical of applause. He changed into garbed in robes of silver, sporting a brush below one arm and a wooden chest beneath the opposite. I felt my respiration select make-up and my heartbeat make-up like a war drum as he neared the center. This turned into it. It became approximately to start the event that had dominated my thoughts for the closing week. Certainly one of my fingers clutched Edward S., whilst the alternative held my omnioculars. I shuffled to the edge of my seat, unable to preserve myself nevertheless. In the subsequent 2D, Mustafa said make-up his broom, his head snapping make-up in our popular route, before he gave a sharp nod. And now, bellowed Felix, let the 423rd Quidditch World Cup very last start. Mustafa kicked the crate open, the 4 balls bursting make-upwards into the air, before he kicked off from the ground and shot off after them, the sound of his whistle ringing across the pitch. And so it started out. They re-off. Felix screamed. Symes seizes the quaffle, passes to Zweig. Return to Symes. Now Ezel. Into the Hawkshead attacking formation. The South African chasers streaked together throughout the pitch like a massive arrow, the New Zealand team flying after them. Come on. Alice screamed hysterically. Come on. Ezel rankings. Yeah. Alice and Rosalie cried together, both of them leaping up inside the equal moment because the thousands of others. I shouted, I notion you had been supporting New Zealand. Diamonds, Bella, Rosalie responded, as though that should provide an explanation for the whole lot. I rolled my eyes, at the same time as Edward shook his head disbelievingly. New Zealand take ownership, said Felix. Bray, Harkham, Kobe. Lower back to Harkham. And he drops the quaffle. A superb goal there via Vosloo. Luckily, the bludger hadn't related with its supposed target. Bray had swerved out of the manor just in time, but in doing so he had lost his keep on the ball, and it turned into speedy intercepted by using the South Africans. Zweig in possession. She passes to Ezel. Back to Zweig. Now Symes. Can he make it beyond Lawrence? He shoots he ratings. A marvelous aim, there, by means of Isaac Symes. I groaned. We had been best 2 minutes into the sport and already I used to be regretting my desire of aspect. Possibly this changed into one crew that not even New Zealand might be capable of compete with. By the time the South Africans had scored their 4th aim, I had my head in my fingers. As of yet, their opponents didn't place the quaffle via the ring even once. The Abadwa fairies kept rearranging themselves so that they formed the phrases we rule earlier than switching to you drool. Symes takes the quaffle over again. Over to Ezel. Back to Zweig. Ezel. Will this be some other intention for South Africa? My coronary heart was pounding as the brand New Zealand chasers raced in advance of the South Africans. Bray flew in from the left, Kobe streaked under them, and Harkham got here in from the proper. After they were about 20 meters ahead, all of them concurrently flipped back on themselves in one mind-boggling maneuver, and rocketed back in the direction of the opposition. If I used to be gobsmacked through the flow, it became not anything in evaluation the South African chasers' reactions. They were completely taken off protect through the surprising offensive shift, and scattered automatically just as the New Zealanders swerved. Ezel drops the quaffle, Felix shouted. Kobe takes it, over to Harcum. Again to Kobe. Now Bray. Right here's the first test for the South African keeper. Bray fires, he scores. Yes SSS. I cheered, capturing to my feet. The boys had been reacting just as excitedly as me, mainly Jasper, who became screaming like a maniac. I guess he couldn't assist himself no longer whilst he had the satisfaction of approximately 85,000 people to cope with. The South African aren't glad, Edward chuckled. He pointed to Vosloo and Symes, both of whom have been arguing with the referee. What are they saying? Vosloo is accusing the South Africans of blatching. What is blatching? Asked Esme. Flying with the cause to collide. It is a sort of foul, I defined. Mustafa is not agreeing, although, he persisted, due to the fact the brand New Zealanders pulled out at the closing minute. It became by no means their intention to hit the other chasers. They simply desired to cause them to think it changed into. The referee became getting angry. Vosloo and Symes had now been joined by means of Merrick, Ezel, and Zweig, all worrying that he disallow the intention. Mustafa, whose face became turning an unpleasant coloration of percent, angrily blew his whistle, formally ending the argument. The factor is allowed, referred to as Felix, and the quaffle is lower back in play. He continued his statement because the South Africans treated the ball. Just as Ezel became about to release the quaffle closer to the hoops, but Esplin struck a bludger at him, cracking him directly at the wrist. Ezel drops the quaffle, after that sensational hit via Arika Esplin. Now Bray has the ball. Over to Kobe, who dodges Symes. Arising close to the scoring location now, and New Zealand score. The crowds right away went wild. This is exceptional, Emmett bellowed, inflicting my cheering to morph into satisfied laughter. I love Quidditch. It looks as if something's amiss with Ezel, Felix said once the group had died down. His voice by no means lost its cheerfulness, although I became my omnioculars to the South African chaser. He had descended onto the pitch and changed into cradling his wrist, his expression barely twisted as a result of the pain Esplin's swing had inflicted. His wrist is damaged, Carlyle said incredulously. Does that occur regularly, Bella? Sure. I shrugged. Quidditch is a hard sport. What number of bones have you ever had damaged? I cast my mind again to the Hogwarts fits, and stated, 3 toes, fingers, my left arm, and I once fractured my elbow. Edward's eyebrows knitted collectively at my revelation. Even though I used to be physically first class at gift, the mere concept of me being in ache turned into annoying for him. I ought to see that during his eyes. A spindly guy with flaming, pink hair went rushing out to meet the injured participant. He pointed his wand at his broken wrist, and within a remember of seconds, he become jogging returned the manner he had come. Ezel, his wrist now mended, kicked off from the ground and sword returned into the air. After Esplin's hit, the South Africans seemed to up their game. Merrick, in his efforts to save Harcum from attaining the scoring area, hit the chaser difficult on the shoulder together with his bat, much to the outrage of the New Zealand supporters. The second one Harcum dropped the quaffle, it became intercepted with the aid of Symes, who rocketed off down the sphere. He didn't get very a long way, although, due to the fact the referee blew his whistle and recalled the quaffle. The South Africans tried to object whilst their competitors were given a penalty, however Mustafa refused to entertain the concept that Merrick's hit had been accidental. There is no way that changed into a mistake, stated Edward, his eyes at the South African beater. His simplest regret became that he failed to hit Harcum harder. Harcum receives prepared to take the shot. The pressure's on now for Christian Marks. Will he make the store? On Marks misses. Hell yeesss. Cheered Emmett. Come on New Zealand. He stuffed his popsicle back into his mouth, while the witches and wizards persevered their celebratory applause. During the subsequent hour, the two teams have been nearly neck and neck. Despite the fact that the South Africans appeared to paintings better together offensively than the New Zealanders, as expected, their defense left something to be desired, and they seemed to depend completely at the beaters each time the brand New Zealanders won ownership of the quaffle. Luckily, Hardy and Esplin were precise at protecting the opposite gamers from bludgers. And Zweig is coming up to the quick catches sight of the snitch. He is diving. Vivier is available in after him. I do not see it. I referred to as frantically. In which S the snitch? I don't see it. It's on the opposite side of the pitch, Jasper answered confusedly. He is fainting, cried Emmett. My eyes locked with Vivier. He turned into firing downwards like a comet, on the lookout for something that he could not see, something that wasn't even there. Swift pulls up, and ooh, that should have hurt Lucas. Vivier falls for the Wronski feint. Vivier turned into laid out at the grass, his face contorted with pain as he awaited the Metawizards. Over again, it didn't take them long to complete their work. And Swift's distraction appears to have accomplished the trick because New Zealand is back in possession. Bray has the quaffle, and passes to Kobe. The South African chasers go to head them off. Can they woo-ah? Holy jollybean, I squealed, pouncing to my feet within the equal second as Wooden, Angelina, and Katie. No manner. My vintage Quidditch buddies, and that I may as well have been at a Peculiar Sisters live performance, because we were squealing like a group of lovesick schoolgirls as the New Zealanders rocketed past us, executing a pass I had by no means seen before. While Kobe flew in a directly line, the other chasers stood circling around her to confuse the opposition and shield her towards any feasible tackle. The two beaters flew in the front and at the back of, geared up to shield the players in opposition to properly aimed bludgers. What a top-notch new pass. I provide you with the Kobe corkscrew, girls and gentlemen. Oh my God, screamed Wooden fanatically, oh my God. The South Africans had no idea how to react. That they had by no means have been able to make it past the opposite players to reach Kobe, for she changed into shielded on all aspects. On the ultimate possible moment, the players scattered, leaving the way clean for the chaser. She shot into the scoring place, pulled lower back her arm, and released the quaffle through the leftmost hoop. Any other point to New Zealand. They are best 10 points at the back of the South Africans now. This definitely is all of us recreation. The roar of the tiger totem sounded through the stadium, filling me with an high-quality feeling of heat, reinforcing my guide for the New Zealand group. It need to have affected the South Africans too, due to the fact Ezel's next swing regarded a bit one-two-hearted. Ooh, an easy seize there for Gabriel Lawrence. In no way mind, Ezel. Perhaps next Vivier's after the snitch. Felix screamed all of sudden. There it Miles. That is no feint, girls and gents. I see it, I shouted, slightly registering the dryness in the back of my throat as I stared through my omnioculars. There's the snitch. The other players stopped their recreation as they watched Rapid and Vivier race across the arena like two outsized bullets. They are neck and neck, screamed Felix excitedly, as the two seekers raced near the floor. After they have been handiest meters away, both accomplishing for the tiny golden ball, the snitch changed path, and shot backwards over their heads. Vivier didn't react quick sufficient. He endured taking pictures forwards, and by the point he pulled into his huge U-flip, it become too past due. Fast had changed direction right now, flipping backwards like Kobe, Harkham and Bray had earlier after they had cut off the South African chasers. Vivier did the whole thing in his power to shut the space, but he could not push the broom tough sufficient, because with fierce willpower and unerring talent, Rapid swiped his arm via the air in one blindingly speedy pass, and closed his hands round New Zealand's victory. He did it, cried the video game's master. He did it. The stadium exploded right into a symphony of shouts, cheers, and song. Completely overcome by using the elation and pleasure of the moment, I released myself at Edward with all of the pace I ought to muster. He stuck me effortlessly and swung me round, certainly just as thrilled with the achievement as me. Acton Swift catches the snitch, endured Felix, leaving the rating at 370 factors to New Zealand, and 130 to South Africa. New Zealand win the Quidditch World Cup. Sure, boomed Emmett, prodding Alice difficult at the shoulder. You lose, little freak. You lose. In no way idea I would see the day, Jasper laughed, ruffling his spouse's hair. We ought to have made bets, Emmett stated, shaking his head. I think the sheer satisfaction of beating Alice is enough, stated Edward. Alice caught her tongue out at her brothers and husband, however she couldn't hold from smiling. The excitement of the game changed into too overwhelming, even for her. Timber changed into locked in an embody with Angelina and Katie. He draped his palms over their shoulders, his eyes packed with unashamed tears as he appeared out onto the pitch wherein the New Zealand team had been colliding in hugs of absolute pleasure, all determined to congratulate their teammates and celebrate their monumental win. The South Africans appeared understandably dejected as they landed. Nevertheless, they humbly shook palms with the winning players, earlier than they left the pitch, flying upwards in our path to enter the box, where Australia's, New Zealand's and South Africa's ministers for magic had been expecting them. New Zealand's national anthem may be heard throughout the stadium as the group completed their victory lap, followed carefully by means of the rainbow totems, who kept their sacred track in time with the fans chanting. Whilst the gamers had made a complete circuit, they joined the other crew in addition alongside our field. And now, ladies and gentlemen, might you please place your palms together for our runners-up, the South African national Quidditch team. He referred to as their names as they personally stepped forwards to acquire their silver medals, which were located round their necks via the Australian minister. Christian Marks, said Felix, even as the group clapped appreciatively, the South African team keeper. Subsequently the three chasers Isaac Symes, Dominique Ezel, and Lerato Zweig, each of whom did a high-quality job out on the sector these days. Subsequent, the beaters, Tumelo Merrick and DeMarco Vosloo. And, eventually, please supply a round of applause for the South African seeker, Lucas Vivier. Vivier's expression was greater forlorn than any of the opposite crew individuals. I suppose he felt awful for failing to seize the snitch after his comrades had performed so nicely. Then, Felix became his interest to the New Zealanders, all of whom were grinning madly, like their faces have been frozen so they could need to spend eternity smiling. If that had been the case, I don't assume they could have minded so much. And, now, please place your palms collectively for our champions New Zealand's national Quidditch group. The stadium exploded with thunderous applause because the minister positioned the primary gold medal over the keeper's neck. Gabriel Lawrence, the chasers Carter Bray, Eleanor Kobe, and James Harcombe. Next, the beaters Darwin Hardy, and Arika Asplin. And closing, however virtually no longer least, New Zealand's captain and seeker, Acton Speedy. Whilst the ultimate medal have been given, the cup became ultimately delivered forth and handed to Speedy, who raised it into the air to a tumult of cheers and screams. I clapped so hard that I nearly conceived my arms would shatter, and all across the gigantic stadium, flags of blue, white and pink were waving to have fun the victory of the Australian neighbours. The cup became exceeded along the road of gamers. Everybody desired to touch it before it became surpassed to New Zealand's minister even as the group finished some other celebratory lap. The witches and wizards filling the bins shot plant life from the recommendations in their wands as the gamers surpassed, showering them with hundreds of red roses, creating a stark comparison as they fell upon the inexperienced grass of the pitch. That changed into one of the coolest matters I have ever seen. The World Series will by no means be the identical after this, laughed Emmett. Global collection? Asked Seamus in puzzlement. Baseball, I said, hoping that he would be familiar with the term. Dean smirked, provoking some other harassed look from Seamus. Baseball for women, he defined. What? Cried Emmett. No way, man. Baseball rules. Come on, mate, laughed Dean. All baseball is rounders, as we love to name it on our aspect of the pond, as attempting to hit a ball a ways enough so that you could make it spherical the pitch before the fielders can throw it returned. Oh, this is proper, sniggered Jasper, properly humoredly, you are the football enthusiast. Football enthusiast, Dean corrected. An appropriate term is soccer, stated Emmett, agreeing together with his brother. Sorry, mate. However, because you lend the call football to a game where you spend an excellent part of the time carrying the ball on your fingers, I assume I will stay with the unique term. The pleasant banter endured as we left the stadium. It became all harmless and playful enough, even if Emmett instructed Dean he was going to drink his blood. The threats made by using the vampires had been turning into less powerful, but the teenage witches and wizards, even though they knew exactly what the Cullens have been, had advanced too much except as true within the short time they had recognized them. No matter the regular hazard posed by way of the vampires, no person appeared with a view to accept the idea that they could ever hurt anybody. To individuals who had been gift on the warfare, the Cullens had been pals. It was as simple as that. Consequently, the motive why Dean could not take Emmett severely when he made his teasing threats. He simply laughed, and punched him gently on the arm, although the movement itself can also have prompted him a touch ache, an awful lot to the burly vampire's amusement. At the give-up of the day, smiled Seamus. I assume we will all agree that Muggle sports aren't any competition when it comes to Quidditch. Damn proper, seconded Ron. Did you notice the corkscrew? That become bloody ill. I suppose you may be attempting that one out after we make the residence group, bells. I may not get in, I reminded him. PFF'd, as though, if you don't make Gryffindor once more this year, I will adopt an Acromantula. I might alternatively you than me, laughed Rosalie. Those matters are horrid. Yeah, I smirked, you ought to have heard Emmett's squeals. I did no longer squeal, he insisted. They took me with the aid of surprise, it really is all. Sounded like a squeal to me, Timber teased. Dude, I saved your lifestyles. You are purported to back me up. Oh, proper sure, of path so stupid of me, he answered theatrically. Ahem, Emmett does not squeal. He's strong. He destroys massive spiders. The New Zealanders have been celebrating as we made our way via the camp. Fireworks have been blasting overhead, creating dozens of brilliant photographs, including a giant snitch and the countrywide flag. My eyes had been continuously at the sky as we traveled inside the route of our tent, which intended that I tripped every 10 seconds. Ultimately, Edward simply lifted me off the ground, positioning me so that my legs were draped over his shoulders. I felt like a few sort of infant still, I failed to protest. Edward suddenly broke into smooth chuckles, his head turning to Ron. I am now not positive he'd like that, considering he's used to taking on bears. Huh, stated Emmett, sensing that the subject of communication had not but modified. Yeah, stated Ron, but thinking about how large they re. You don't simply get that from the name although. What are you two occurring about? Requested Ginny, her eyes narrowed in suspicion. Ron is thinking about the opportunities of Emmett as a bodyguard. He is thinking about the title of Spider Slayer. It has capacity, Ron smirked. I don't suppose there's any need to worry, Emmett laughed. We officially exterminated your 8-legged buddies. Ron grinned widely, and turned into approximately to respond, only Seamus spoke earlier than he could get the chance. You absolutely are a thoughts reader, are not you? He said, his eyes on Edward. It turned into inside the prophet, however What? I blurted, absolutely and wholly shocked by using the surprising revelation. Well yeah, Seamus persisted, it became inside the document they issued after the war. I surely did want to get around to studying that. There has been a bit in approximately you lot, and they appear to recognize approximately Edward's abilities. My eyes flicked to Ron. His eyes had been constant at the direction beforehand, however his ears had been turning a deep coloration of pink. Sooner or later, he became to appearance Edward in the eye, but he failed to communicate. I guessed that he became speaking silently. I leaned forward slightly in order that I may want to peer at Edward's face, and realized that he was smiling. Possibly he didn't thoughts others' understanding of his competencies, as long as those people failed to shape into the category of ordinary either. Don't worry approximately it, he said sincerely, much to Ron's comfort. Ought to make matters a piece awkward, Seamus mused. I have to expected him to mention something like that. He by no means had been recognized for his tact. You get used to it, Emmett muttered, a little resentfully. Luckily for Bella, she would not need to what? Get used to it. Edward cannot examine her thoughts, with her understanding occlumency and everything. Harry's head snapped in my direction. You are an Cullens, he wondered disbelievingly. I nodded, before recounting the tale of why and how I had learnt the precise form of magic. He and Hermione appeared as an alternative impressed with my disclosure, and I quickly determined that Harry himself had once tried to increase the ability, even though he hadn't been quiet as a success. It is tough at the start, I agreed. Once you've got practiced long enough, although, you don't without a doubt should think about it. I assume it almost becomes something you do subconsciously. I might in all likelihood ought to concentrate to show it off these days. Edward iced over all at once, and I right away realized my mistake. Whilst he nevertheless hadn't moved after 10 seconds of stillness, I commenced to worry. The others, too, stopped once they observed that Edward had. In the end, he reached up and effects lifted me from his shoulders to place me on my toes in the front of him. His eyes had been slightly glassy, yet his expression was no much less excessive. You could do this, he whispered. I idea that it changed into permanent magic. Everlasting, scoffed Hermione. Where do you get that idea? I am now not certain. I just assumed. It handiest works so long as you are centered, Harry explained. Turning it off isn't always the trouble, it's getting it to work within the first place. In spite of the fact that I considered him a good pal, I had never wanted to kick Harry greater than I did in that moment. Edward's eyes never left my face as we persevered our stroll through the maze of tents. Sooner or later, we reached our own, and bid the others good night. It was already 1 beyond 11, and way to my restlessness the preceding night time, I failed to even must feign tiredness. I walked slowly up the stairs with Edward, not able to shake the experience of dread which the current communique had inspired. I knew what was coming, and I desperately wanted to avoid it. So what did you think of the match? I asked as we entered his room. I walked over to the bed, leaping backwards onto the spongy comforter as I commenced tugging at my boots. Did you recall the way the South Africans iced over whilst? I knew it have been useless to try. There has been no manner to prevent the inevitable. Edward became far too curious for that. I am able to sense you, Edward the First sighed, locating his eyes. His forehead creased at my words. When you try this, I will feel you on the rims. What do you imply? While you attempt to interrupt into my thoughts, I will feel it. It appears like what? He asked quietly, edging closer. I don't know the way to explain it. It is like a malicious program, I admitted, apologetically. Like something wriggling on the outskirts of my mind, looking for a manner internal. The sensation isn't always bodily, as in I can sense it in that feel, but it creates a form of mental pain, like I am being attacked. I am now not seeking to hurt you, Bella, he said swiftly, final the space between us. His face became concerned for a few cause, nearly like he turned into afraid he'd disappointed me in a few manner. I simply need to know you. You do recognize me, I reminded him. His expression had a wistful appearance about it as he made his respond. It was barely heartbreaking. I do, he nodded, however I will pay attention each person else's mind while, truly, the only one I am interested in is yours. At one time, I have the ability to interrupt down your defenses to find a manner internal, however I by no means should, and earlier than long, I just widespread it as an impossibility. And, now, I find out that it is not an. He sighed and closed his eyes, his respiration a bit uneven. While he sooner or later lifted his lids to look at me from beneath his lashes, his irises were packed with a silent plea, and that I felt as though my heart might shatter into 1,000 pieces if I have been to refuse him. Even then, I couldn't help the anxiety that overtook me after I considered the idea of disclosing myself in this type of way. To accomplish that would sincerely be the equivalent of stripping myself of all my garments and wandering outdoor. Please, he begged in a whisper, it's all I want. Please, Bella, I don't even recognize if I can, I said uncertainly. I have been doing it for goodbye. If it does not work, it would not work, but allow us simply try. This scene turned into horribly acquainted, only this time, I used to be the reluctant party. Edward turned into employing my own methods against me, and although I wanted to assert that they'd little impact, I couldn't. I glanced on the silver pendulum wall clock. It read 20 to 12. I will strive, I stated in the end, my eyes flicking lower back to Edward's, but it isn't permanent. I nonetheless want to exercise occlumency. I would not want you to offer it up, he insisted, his mind more than likely flying to the Volturi and their bold presence. Okay, I replied softly, inhaling a consistent breath, you have until nighttime and then the spell breaks. He at once diminished his head to kiss me, absolutely conveying each ounce of gratitude inside the ensuing moments, before he lightly moved me similarly up the mattress so that we may want to lie down beside each other. Once I used to be cozy, my head resting towards his chest. Even as his arm wound around my waist, I turned my attention to decreasing my mental defenses. I could nonetheless feel the strange sensation at the edge of my thoughts, and targeting permitting the determined trespasser internal. It turned into just as difficult as I would anticipated, like trying to wriggle out of a skin-tight cat healthy crafted from page C. Abruptly, Edward's intellectual prodding disappeared, and I figured that he'd withdrawn. Perhaps he'd determined he did not need to listen my mind, in spite of everything. I wouldn't have blamed him. He was possibly afraid that listening might lead to the unavoidable sadness. With my thoughts shielded, I used to be a thriller with my mind found out. Alternatively, he'd see that my thoughts became like every other uninteresting teenager, as simple and dull. No longer like him. He was the very opposite of easy and boring. He was tremendous, creative, considerate, no longer to say smarter than Einstein. I didn't even want to reflect on consideration on how we differed bodily. Doing so changed into nearly painful. I nonetheless could not recognize why someone so lovely could choose a person like me. In phrases of looks, I used to be excruciatingly unexceptional. I became my head to have a look at him, ready to apologize, but his expression stopped me. It changed into an aggregate of incredulousness and vexation. "Bella," he murmured, pinching the bridge of his nose as he constantly did whilst he changed into indignant. His eyes snapped open and his hand moved far from his face, the corners of his lips twitching barely, as if he had just remembered something funny, earlier than his expression have become stony over again. "I had hoped which you had stopped thinking like that a long term ago." I stared at him confusedly for a second, but then the understanding hit me like a tidal wave, right away triggering a burning that unfolded from the bottom of my neck as much as my cheeks. "He can hear me crap. That docent without a doubt Cal it," he said. "The way you watched of yourself it's infuriating, Bella." He maneuvered his frame in order that he changed into hovering over me. The movement was so quick, it became practically a blur. His eyes were smoldering, causing my pulse to accelerate unexpectedly as I regarded into them. There ought to most effective have been a millimeter or so setting apart our bodies. I was speedy forgetting that my mind turned into open to him as I closed the space between us. There has been nothing in the world that changed into better than kissing Edward. The entirety about it become heavenly, from the luscious fragrance of his breath and skin, to the texture of his marble hard lips on mine. It turned into like kissing a god, without a doubt an eye-catching activity, my favorite activity. Heaven assist me if I should ever must collect a list of interests. It'd possibly read: "My name is Bella Swan, and my favored things to do consist of kissing Edward, looking Edward, kissing Edward, contemplating Edward, kissing Edward, dreaming of Edward, and, sooner or later, kissing Edward." He suddenly pulled back, a playful smile forming on his face. "You really are addicted, aren't you?" he teased. If possible, my face turned a deeper shade of tomato red. "You re my brand of heroin," I shrugged. He laughed loudly then, his expression dripping with satisfaction, and said, "I do believe I've heard that somewhere before." And then we were kissing again, but it was more intense this time. Only when I was running out of air would Edward stop, moving down my neck until he reached my collarbone, where he would skim the tip of his nose, or his mouth, along the skin, before moving back up to kiss me again. We must have spent at least 10 minutes doing that, and I couldn't help but think that Christmas had come early. Of course, I couldn't stop my mind from flitting to the muscles hidden beneath his shirt as I ran my hands over his shoulder blades. Realizing that Edward could hear every hormone-driven thought coursing through my mind, I did my best not to think of those, but the harder I tried, the more abysmally I failed, and eventually I just resigned myself to the inevitable, savoring my delicious imaginings. My body must have been hotwired to those pictures, because before I knew what I was doing, I was unbuttoning his shirt and pulling it off him, and he never moved to stop me. He simply complied with my wishes, releasing a low growl as my hands explored the contours of his torso. I thought about the power there, the absolute strength. That idea alone was enough to set my blood on fire, igniting an unshakable hunger that had nothing whatsoever to do with my stomach. I suddenly found myself being pulled up from my reclining position against the comforter, so that I was kneeling in his lap whilst he raised my arms and tugged my sequin top over my head. My heart began pumping faster as I inhaled shallow, uneven breaths. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the black, glitzy fabric hit the far wall. At one time I probably would have felt self-conscious at the mere concept of appearing in front of Edward in nothing but a pair of leggings and a silky black bra. I'd gotten over that, though, during the swimsuit episode. He seemed to have liked what he saw back then. More than liked, he corrected. Despite the chill of his icy skin, I felt hot. I leaned backwards, allowing him to support my weight, relishing the way his hand snaked around my back as he kissed along my chest. Has he changed his mind? Suddenly, I tumbled against the springy comforter, the brace of his arms having vanished. When I looked up, I saw that he had fled to the other side of the room. He was stood facing me, his chest heaving as he inhaled deep, calming breaths. I moved swiftly to the edge of the bed, only just conscious of the way my body had coiled as if I preparing to spring, like some kind of predator. A mischievous smile spread across Edward's face. Evidently he found my thoughts entertaining. "You have no idea," he said, his voice rugged yet velvety in the same moment. He took a step closer, and I couldn't prevent my eyes from wandering downwards. He was literally the definition of perfection. "I think you have us confused." He took another step towards me, his eyes mimicking mine as they traveled the length of me, seeming to linger longer in some places than others. I realized then that we looked like some kind of Calvin Klein advert. Edward in his dark jeans, his hair stylishly messy, and me in my black, skin-tight leggings and a dark bra, my hair big and wavy, my eyes still black and smoky with the makeup I had applied earlier. It was my turn to take a step closer, now. I wanted to be near him like before. "You have a dangerous mind, Bella," he smirked, stopping me in my tracks. "Beautiful, but dangerous. If everyone had my abilities, you'd intoxicate even the most sensible of men. I think it's you that has us confused, or do you not remember the effect you had on poor Mrs. Cope, or Jessica, or the waitress we met at the restaurant in Port Angeles? I don't think you could class those as sensible," he answered, though he seemed to cringe at the memory. "Still," I smirked, "I think I've proven my point." He shook his head and closed the distance, lifting me back onto the bed. It was 5 minutes to midnight now. Edward's time was running out. "I should ask some questions, then," he said as we arranged ourselves into a more relaxed position. "What were your thoughts when you first saw my family and I? You obviously knew what we were." I cast my mind back. Aside from being mesmerized by their impossible beauty, the dominant emotion had been fear. I knew what they were, but their eye color had confused me greatly. Edward's hostile glares had terrified me at first, but even the possibility that he wanted to drink my blood hadn't been enough to expel my curiosity and thirst for knowledge. He had become an instant source of intrigue, a puzzle I desperately wanted to solve. "What's your favorite memory?" he asked next. "There are too many to pick from." I went over my recollections, all those involving Edward, showing him them from my perspective, and describing how it had felt the first time he had kissed me. I also replayed for him the scene where I had received my first visit from McGonagall the day I had discovered that I was a witch. I also took him through my memories of my first trip on the Hogwarts Express, along with the sorting ceremony, and the words I had heard when the hat was placed on my head. "A tricky one," it had said. "I sense all the qualities of 3 great houses: courage, wit, and loyalty. But which is your greatest?" "I think Gryffindor." "Naturally," Edward chuckled. I showed him the Gryffindor common room where I had spent so many days and nights plotting with the boys. I showed him the day we had won the Quidditch Cup, remembering the way it had felt when the other students had lifted my team members and I into the air, carrying us back towards the school in celebration. "That was a good day," I thought, smiling widely. "I am sure it was," he said. "I only wish I could have been there to see it." I sighed then, my eyes finding the silver clock. It was 30 seconds to midnight. "You're not going to give me a little longer? Just keeping you on your toes. Maybe that could be my Christmas present, a full day of no occlumency." Maybe that wouldn't be such a bad thing considering how far we came in only 20 minutes. "You definitely have a one-track mind." I blushed, and turned my attention to rebuilding my defenses. It wasn't nearly as difficult as it had been to lower them. It felt natural and comfortable. In the last moment before the wriggling at the edge of my mind returned, I filled my thoughts with the 3 truest words that I knew. "I love you." And then my mind closed, the spell of the night ending with the last chime of the clock. "I love you too," said Edward, leaning his head down to kiss me on the forehead. "Thank you. You're welcome," I said, glad that he was happy. I still think that I should have been allowed more time. I am fairly sure that Cinderella had longer than 20 minutes. True, but the magic always ends at midnight. Only in the stories, he pointed out. I smiled. "Do you not remember what Bertie Bigwig said about us, the girl and the vampire?" "Yes, we read the stuff of fairy tales." I nodded silently. "Like Beauty and the Beast," he smirked. I frowned then, knowing exactly which character he would identify with. "Not quite," I whispered, "but I think the endings are the same." And then we kissed once more, as was only proper. "I don't get it," Emmett said as we entered King's Cross Station. "How can people not notice when you walk through a solid wall?" They just don't. I shrugged. Magical gateways are usually protected with enchantments to stop muggles from noticing. Besides, they're always in too much of a hurry to see what's right in front of them. We walked along the platform, each of us pushing a trolley loaded with our possessions. Obviously the vampires could have managed without, but to avoid unwanted attention, they had agreed to do things the human way. Talto hooted softly as we reached the barrier. He seemed to be just as happy to be going back to Hogwarts as I was. The lead up had almost been unbearable, especially when the Cullens had left to hunt. I had spent those hours trapped in my room, rereading my 6th-year textbooks. I had even skimmed the sections I was due to study. The areas inciting the most interest were those centered on human-to-animal transfiguration. My chief goal this year was to become an animagus. I knew it would be difficult, but I was determined to succeed. Once I had covered all the necessary revision, I had turned my attention to the newspaper which Tom, the Leaky Cauldron's innkeeper, had been kind enough to lend me. It was actually quite an interesting read, discussing everything related to Voldemort's downfall. The first 3 pages had provided a detailed description of the celebrations which had taken place throughout the country in the immediate hours following Harry's victory. In London, the sky had been alight with thousands of shooting stars, upon which all eyes had been focused, including those belonging to non-magical people. In Birmingham, a parade of ecstatic witches and wizards had frightened unsuspecting muggles as they pranced down the streets in pajamas and long johns, swinging their nightcaps above their heads in hysterical fashion. In Leeds and Sheffield, the skies had burned with the brilliant lights of hundreds of fancy, magical fireworks, thereby creating quite a bit of work for the Obliviators. The last English city to be mentioned was Manchester, where the entire Mancunian wizarding community had gathered together and had succeeded in disturbing the peace until the early hours of the morning. The part which had interested me most, however, had been the section on the battle. The article had given the names and background of everyone involved, as well as issuing the details of their contribution. As I was already well aware, the Cullens hadn't been missed out. Naturally, friendly and heroic vampires would be a source of intrigue for anyone, so I could understand why the prophet had reserved an entire page solely for them. I had read it so many times that I practically knew it off by heart. Although the students, teachers, and friends of Hogwarts fought fiercely and valiantly, many have admitted that their losses would have been far greater had it not been for the efforts of the family of vampires known as the Cullens. Oliver Wood, a former pupil who has since earned a place with Puddlemere United, fought alongside the group during the battle. I don't even want to think of how we would have fared without the help of the Cullens and Hales, Wood confesses. Whenever a curse or jinx would come flying our way, one of them would dive in front to take the hit. Vampire skin, which is far harder than that belonging to giants or dragons, has the power to reflect even the most powerful of spells, including the 3 unforgivable curses. According to the professional Quidditch player, the diet of the peculiar family differs greatly to that of the average vampire. Rather than feeding off humans, the Cullens prefer to hunt animals, which gives their eyes a unique golden shade, as opposed to the typical red. In an exclusive interview, Eldred Werple, author of Blood Brothers: My Life Amongst the Vampires, gave his opinion on the curious coven. Those who have read Blood Brothers will know that vampires aware of the magical world can use dragon's blood as an alternative to their usual diet, thereby achieving a certain civility. However, a vampire resisting the call of blood without the influence of the wizarding world is virtually unheard of. I would guess that only those of exceptional moral fiber could achieve such without magical stimulus to substitute human blood with animal blood, when the latter would fail to fully alleviate the pain of venom, reinforces the Cullens as a laudable family, one which deserve the full acceptance and gratitude of the wizarding community. The family is made up of 7 members. The head of the coven is known as Dr. Carlisle Cullen, whose is rumored to have a restraint so extraordinary that he is able to practice medicine amongst injured humans. He and his wife, Esme Cullen, have taken on the role as parents to the 5 other vampires. Rosalie Hale and Alice Cullen are their adopted daughters, and are married to Emmett Cullen and Jasper Hale. The last member of the family, Edward Cullen, was recently engaged to Isabella Swan, a young attendant of Hogwarts School, who, coincidentally, happens to be his blood singer. Sources report that Mr. Edward Cullen has the power to read minds, though his gift does not require direct eye contact like that of most legilimens, and can be used from a distance. One thing is certain: Miss Swan has some serious competition. Although the army of infatuated schoolgirls know better than to irritate the female vampires, challenging the 18-year-old girl would prove far less hazardous, and whilst their efforts will almost certainly be in vain, the heroic heartthrob appears to be far too tempting to resist. They all absolutely, 100% brilliant, especially Edward, says student Lavender Brown, whilst twirling a strand of hair around her index finger. There was a Death Eater about to send a curse my way, and Edward jumped between us to stop me from getting hurt. We became close friends, naturally. The article had become progressively worse after that, describing interviews with the numerous lovesick girls, all of whom seemed to be under the false impression that they shared something special with Edward and his family. I had thrown the paper at the wall at least 3 times in my frustration. Edward, of course, had tried to reassure me, but his attempts had done nothing to lessen my anxiety. Obviously I knew that the other witches held no interest for him, and that his unchanging nature meant that he would love me forever still. That didn't erase the fact that he was susceptible to the vampire version of Amortentia. I knew the lengths that obsessed magical teens would go to achieve their ends, and the thought made me uneasy. I was counting on Edward's enhanced sense of smell to save him from that kind of danger, though either way, I couldn't believe my luck, as if there wasn't enough separating us, and now my boyfriend and his family had achieved overnight celebrity status. I'd have to watch my temper more than ever this year. This is it, I announced, stopping a few meters from the barrier. It looks like a regular brick wall, Rosalie answered skeptically. What were you expecting, flashing light bulbs and banners? I guess not, she said, but you sure we won't just crash into the brick? I nodded confidently, preparing myself for the run-up. As usual, the best way to convince the Cullens would be to give them a demonstration. Before I could set off, however, Alice eagerly ran at the wall, pushing herself and her trolley through the gateway and out of sight. Jasper followed immediately afterwards, needing no more encouragement as he sped off after his wife. Then it was Rosalie and Emmett's turn, leaving only Edward and me behind. Ladies first, he smiled, waving a hand towards the gateway. How about we go together? I walked towards the wall, waiting for him to join me. When I reached the edge, he made his way over, positioning his trolley against mine. Then, we both stepped through the barrier together, coming out on the other side to the sight of bustling crowds and the familiar red engine, steam billowing from the chimney at its front. That thing doesn't look very speedy, Emmett grumbled. We could run to Hogwarts faster. It's the experience that counts, Alice chided. Why does everything have to be about speed? Because I'd like to get there today, thank you very much. And you will, she promised, so just enjoy it. I looked along the platform, eager to see the faces of those returning to the school. Amongst the crowd of young children, I distinguished one small boy who was staring our direction. He had a very familiar face, and it took me a moment to figure out why, but I soon realized that he was the child who had been the first to approach the vampires before the battle. He waved when he saw us looking, and came running over once we had returned the gesture. Hello, he said, his voice loaded with excitement. Remember me? Of course, Rosalie beamed. We met you in the Great Hall. That's right. He held out his hand in offering, and Rosalie took it willingly, her eyes sparkling as she gazed down at the Gryffindor student. The boy didn't flinch at the touch of her cold skin. In fact, the small reminder of her species only seemed to enhance his delighted expression. His messy hair was a rich, chocolatey color, whilst his warm irises were a deep hazel. I am Amicus Fortison. Are you all going to Hogwarts this year, too? Yes, Rosalie confirmed, and our parents will be there too. They reteaching Muggle studies. The little boy's eyes instantly widened and his jaw dropped slightly. Well, that changes things, he murmured, his brow furrowing in concentration. I was all set for care of magical creatures and divination, but I am not so sure now. You a third year? I asked, assessing his size carefully. When I had first met him, I had guessed that he could have been no more than 11. In truth, his size was what I would have expected for someone his age, but he had such a baby face that I would have thought him to be younger. I only just made it, he smiled. My birthday is August 29th. If it had been a few days later I would have had to wait longer to go to school. That explained it. He was a borderline student, probably even the youngest in his year. So do you think you'll take the subject? Alice asked. Maybe. The only reason I was thinking of taking divination in the first place was because I've heard people say it's difficult to keep a straight face in Trelawney's classes. I frowned. That hardly sounded like a good reason to select a particular subject, but having a vampire professor would be way cooler. Hell yeah, Emmett laughed, offering up his hand for a high five. Amicus smirked and slapped his palm against the brawny vampire's, before looking back over his shoulder after hearing the call of his name. A little way away, a group made up of 2 boys and a girl were stood, obviously waiting for their friend, but too intimidated to approach. "Well, I'd better be going," he said. "I'll see you later." "Sure, little man," Emmett smiled. "See you around." "Bye," Rosalie sang, waving after him as he skipped away from us. "I don't understand," Edward sighed as we began boarding the train. "Don't understand what?" I asked. He wasn't frightened at all. "None of you are. I mean we're still dangerous, but, even so, your kind doesn't seem frightened by us at all. They think of normal vampires, and the fear is the same as it would be if they were faced with an acromantula, and then they see us and their reactions are the equivalent of what you'd expect if they were to spot a particularly colorful butterfly." "Ooh, pretty," I said teasingly, unable to prevent the corners of my mouth from twitching upwards. "It's not funny," he insisted, though he too was smiling slightly. "We're supposed to be scary." "Come on, Edward," I laughed as we began searching for an empty cabin. "You haven't been scary for a while now. You and your family are in vogue. Everybody wants a vegetarian vampire for a friend. You the next pygmy puff." They each looked at me questioningly then, obviously expecting some kind of explanation. Finally, we located free compartment, and after we had all sat down, I began describing the fuzzy little creatures that had captivated so many witches in my 6th year at Hogwarts. "Are you serious?" Emmett cried in outrage. "You can compare us to one of those. We're venomous for God's sake." "So are platypuses," I shrugged, desperately trying to suppress the inevitable grin, "but I'd hardly call them scary." "A pygmy puff and now a platypus," Edward sighed playfully. "Honestly, Bella, you're only giving us further reason to bite you." I cocked an eyebrow at that last remark. It wasn't very often my anxious vampire boyfriend joked about that kind of thing. "It's true, though, isn't it?" Jasper sighed. "There's no fear anymore. I feel like we're letting the side down. Maybe we should consider changing our—" Emmett never got to finish his sentence, because he was interrupted by the sound of the compartment door sliding open, which preceded the spewing, girly outpours of Lavender Brown, who was accompanied by Parvati Patil. "Bella," Lavender gushed, "I can't believe you're here. It seems so strange you going back after you disappeared last year. I hope you had a nice summer." "I did, duh. That's brilliant. And how was yours, Edward?" she asked, spinning on her heels to face the boys, so that she was standing with her back to Alice, Rosalie, and me. I inhaled a sharp breath, my fists forming tight balls, the skin stretching over my knuckles until white. In my periphery, I saw Rosalie's arms cross. "It was very nice, thank you," Edward sighed politely, though I thought I detected a hint of menace in his tone. "We saw you at the Quidditch World Cup, didn't we, Parvati?" and I waved, "but I don't think you saw me. I was preoccupied with the game." "Oh, I know," she continued unabashed. "I am not surprised you didn't notice." "Neither am I thought resentfully. Lavender and I had never exactly been close. We were friends of sorts, but I'd compare that relationship to the one I shared with Jessica. I found her a little superficial and, often, extremely irritating, so I couldn't bring myself to feel bad for the fact that I was currently visualizing myself casting a bad bogey hex on her." She continued to blabber on about the cup, eventually switching the topic to Hogwarts and her expectations for the school year. "I am sure you'll love divination. I wrote to Professor Trelawney after we met in Diagon Alley, and she says that she's foreseen that you'll be taking her class." "Great. I thought now we've attracted the attention of the school loony." Though I heavily doubted she'd be silly enough to predict the death of the vampires, I wouldn't be surprised if I turned out to be less fortunate. "Oh, but you don't take divination, do you, Bella?" She twisted slightly to look at me. "No, well, never mind," she interrupted again, her attention back on Edward. "You can partner up with Parvati and me. It'll be perfect. Breathe, Bella. Go to your happy place. Go to your happy place. I closed my eyes, desperately attempting to drown out the maddening sound of Lavender's voice with images of Edward and me together. My imagination could actually be quite distracting when it wanted to be, and though the pictures it conjured up were somewhat enjoyable, a portion of my mind was still unfortunately focused on my prattling fellow student. When I looked over at Edward, I saw that his face was polite on the surface, but it was definitely masking a number of darker emotions. I thought I could detect the tedium in his eyes. They were fixed on the girl in front of him, yet they were also glassy, as if his mind was somewhere else. In addition, I could see a subtle anger in the set of his mouth. He looked like he could use a distraction as much as me. And then I had a delicious, yet slightly wicked idea. I almost laughed out loud as I once again closed my eyes and allowed my imagination to run away with itself. Then, when my thoughts were filled with images that were so hedonistic they were practically sinful, I concentrated on collapsing my defenses. Unlike last time, I could instantly tell the second I became exposed to mental intrusion, and that awareness made me all the more determined to fill my thoughts with vivid images. It was the Calvin Klein scene all over again, only this time Edward's vampire powers didn't bring an end to my enjoyment. We were slamming into walls with the force of a wrecking ball, everything shattering around us whilst we fell to the floor like a pair of battling lions, our words forming feral growls as we trailed kisses over one another's skin. Edward, I sighed mentally, suddenly realizing that silence filled the cabin. Edward, Lavender asked uncertainly. My eyes snapped open. Edward was still looking at Lavender, but his expression was vacant, his mouth hanging slightly open. My attention briefly flitted to Jasper, whose head was snapping from his brother to Lavender and back again, his face overcome with understandable confusion. I guess he was trying to find the source of Edward's abrupt change in mood. He was looking in the wrong direction. Edward blinked a few times, before shaking his head, undoubtedly attempting to clear it of the lusty images. I beg your pardon, he said. I didn't catch that. What did you say? Beside me, Alice tensed, probably just as baffled as her husband by Edward's peculiar behavior. Lavender opened her mouth to speak, which was when I dived back into my imaginings, eager to make the most of the new weapon I had recently discovered. Edward, I screamed internally, my mind self-clawing at the marble skin of his back as his hands curled around my thighs. I love you. Oh, Edward. Once again, when I opened my eyes, I had to hold back laughter. Edward was blinking excessively, his fingers flying up to pinch the bridge of his nose. Without warning, he stood up suddenly, walking past Lavender and Parvati to gently pull me up from my seat. I am going to have to get back to you on that, he mumbled, edging his way around the girls. I've just remembered something that I need to discuss with Bella. It's urgent. Bye. My mouth formed a hard line in my efforts to stop the triumphant roar of laughter now threatening to burst through my lips. I waved at the girls, who were staring on with puzzlement etched along their expressions as Edward towed me from the room towards the back of the train. Dozens of eyes watched us as we made our way, but they didn't seem to bother the insanely perfect vampire. He merely ignored them and continued along his path. He led me into an empty compartment at the very back of the train, sliding the door shut the second I had stepped through. And then, before I had sufficient time to think, my back was pressed against the window, Edward's eyes bearing into mine. They were alight with amusement, but I could tell from his expression that he was also irritated, for which I could hardly blame him. I bit my lip and waited. Would you mind explaining to me what you were doing back there, please? He said expectantly. I shrugged. She was annoying me. I needed to distract myself. And you felt the need to include me in that, did you? I felt bad leaving you at the mercy of Lavender. So you thought a better alternative would be to turn me into an incoherent idiot. That's what they were all thinking. Edward's lost his wits. I couldn't concentrate of anything she was saying. And you didn't think to look into her mind. I did, he said, his eyes narrowing, but her thoughts were elsewhere. I think I can guess. I shuddered as my mind filled with images of Lavender wrapped around my Edward. I like that, he chuckled, and I knew he was referring to my use of determiner rather than the terrifying mental picture. He leaned down to kiss me, his fingers weaving into my hair whilst mine clasped around his neck, reaching up on my tiptoes to bring us even closer. My skin erupted in goosebumps as his tongue traced along my lower lip, and I quickly responded by assuming the same position that the boyfriend usurper had formed in my head, my legs entwining with Edward's like thick vines. I was so absorbed in the kiss that I barely noticed when the door slid open. An adamant cough, however, demanded my attention. I felt the blood rush to my face as I realized an audience had gathered outside the compartment. Dozens of female faces pressed against the glass panels at the very front stood Lavender. On the surface, she looked embarrassed by the fact that she had interrupted us, but I had a feeling she was feigning. I wouldn't have been surprised in the slightest if she had done it on purpose. The blinds on the doors and window had been left up, so the evidence wasn't working in her favor. "I am so sorry," she said, her hands flying to her heart. I had no idea. "Is she telling the truth, Edward?" "No," he said, squeezing my hand lightly, though his eyes remained fixed to the girl stood opposite. "It's perfectly all right. Bella and I should rejoin the others." His arm slid around my waist as he pulled me towards the door, and I couldn't keep my expression from mirroring the enormous satisfaction that his action provoked as we passed the resentful witches. "You've got a bit of a fan club," I thought. "It's too bad I only have eyes for one girl, then, isn't it?" He smiled. I grinned and nodded, before turning back into our cabin where the others were waiting for us. Though they each bore amused expressions, it wasn't difficult to make out the confusion swimming in their eyes. "Bella thought it would be funny to drop her mental defenses," Edward explained. I couldn't concentrate. "Oh," said the empathic vampire, his face displaying instant understanding. "That would explain it." From the way that Jasper was eyeing his brother, I guessed he was referring to more than his inability to focus. My gaze found Edward, who smirked and winked, playfully confirming my assumption. The Cullens spent the next couple of hours requesting information of my experiences during my first 6 years at school. They wanted to know everything, from the activities I had engaged in during my spare time to the results I achieved in my owls. I got 9 outstandings and 1 acceptable. "What was the acceptable for?" Edward asked curiously. "History of magic," I muttered, a little ashamedly. I was unconscious for the majority of those lessons literally. Professor Binns could put a vampire to sleep. "That bad?" "Yeah," I said, carefully tracing a picture of a tuxedo-clad Edward standing beside the girl that was supposed to be me. I continued sketching whilst the others fired question after question. They were particularly interested in hearing about the Triwizard Tournament, especially when I slipped up and mentioned the Yule Ball. "You actually went?" Edward asked surprised. Yeah, I didn't want to miss anything. It was an exciting time, and since everyone was spending Christmas at Hogwarts, I did too." "Who did you go to the ball with?" Edward pressed. I blushed, my stomach clenching at the memory. "Cormac McLagan," I muttered, unable to meet his gaze. I didn't really know him that well when he asked me. He was in the year above me. He seemed quite charming at first, and since no one else had asked, I just accepted. What happened? Well, everything was all right at first. Apart from my horrific dancing, the opening hour was fun, and then, all of a sudden, he was trying to feel me up. The gentleman disappeared and all that was left was this complete slimeball. I couldn't help myself. I reacted on instinct. "What did you do?" questioned Alice. "I hit him below the belt, cast a jelly-brain jinx, and then ran away. I felt really bad afterwards." I panicked. "So your date was cut short?" Edward asked, a note of hope audible in his voice. I smiled and nodded, my eyes still fixed to my now completed drawing. I pulled out my wand and waved it over the paper. The image transformed into a new one, changing the very next second so that it looked like the figures were dancing over the parchment. Below the image, the words Bella and Edward formed as if they were being written by an invisible hand, only to disappear a few moments after to rewrite themselves. There were plenty of other people to hang around with, and Cormac didn't bother me. He was too busy stuffing breadsticks up his nose. I flicked my wand once more, and said, "Plico Volucris." The paper instantly folded to create a perfect miniature swan, which fluttered from my open palm, circling over the heads of the vampires, who watched as if mesmerized. Finally, the origami creation descended onto Edward's lap, where it unfolded itself, revealing my dancing sketch. He grinned widely, watching the simple scene play out. The others gathered around him, each seeming as entranced as their brother. "Hey, they re-kissing," Emmett chuckled, It's not very true to life, though this Bella hasn't tripped once. I rolled my eyes, but smiled as Edward extracted his wallet from his jacket and slid the paper into one of the free pockets. After hours of discussion and playful interaction, I eventually managed to pull myself away to go and change into my school clothes. It was almost 5 o'clock, so it wouldn't be long until we pulled into Hogsmeade Station. It felt extremely strange to be stepping back into uniform, the charcoal, knee-length skirt, black tights, and dark shoes, the white button-down shirt and red and yellow tie, and, finally, the black work robes bearing the Gryffindor crest. I wondered whether Alice would grumble about having to restrict her wardrobe. She certainly wouldn't have as much time to spend admiring designer outfits, which, in turn, meant that she would be far more likely to spend her free time concentrating on her own image, rather than mine. That was a nice thought. I made my way back along the corridor, towards our compartment, and could only have been about 20 feet away when a door slid open and someone stepped out, effectively cutting me off. The second we saw one another, we froze in our tracks. My mind reacted instantly, the mental defenses rebuilding themselves at the sight of my foe. I was fairly sure that he'd be unable to hurt me in that sense, but occlumency was now a reflexive shield that I would carry forever. Blaze's eyes fixed on my face, whilst his mouth pulled back in an infuriated snarl, obviously realizing now how badly I had fooled him during our last meeting. Well, if it isn't the filthy mudblood, he whispered furiously, snatching his wand from his pocket. We're going to have some fun this year, you and I. I copied instinctively, preparing myself for a duel. Before either of us could throw a jinx, however, 3 low, terrifying growls issued from behind my opponent, and as he turned, slowly but surely, he saw, as did I, the menacing figures of Edward, Emmett, and Jasper. They closed in on Blaze until they were so close that they were leaning in on him, each of them wearing livid expressions. I am tempted, Edward hissed, to let Bella deal with you. I've seen her wipe the floor with dozens of Death Eaters. You wouldn't stand a chance. Emmett's lips pulled back over his teeth. Despite what I had said earlier, he definitely looked scary now. I was so used to his cheery, amused expression. Rarely was I faced with another. Even when he had fought the newborns, he had been wearing a grin of anticipation, so I couldn't understand how he could become so irate over a schoolboy. But, I am sure you can imagine, Edward continued, why I in particular, being a vampire, would take offense after hearing you apply that foul name to my singer. From where I was stood, I could clearly make out the way that Blaze's Adam's apple bobbed up and down as he gave a very distinct gulp. It is by far the most delicious thing I've tasted, so if you ever insinuate that hers is inferior again, don't be surprised if I decide to sample what you claim to be the finer stuff. We Cullens don't usually go for haute cuisine, but I could make an exception. You'd have to share, Emmett smirked ominously. I am sure there'd be enough for all of us, Jasper smirked. Emmett and I will settle for the radial arteries, you can have the carotid, Edward. Thanks, he said, his eyes never leaving Blaze, who looked on in horror as the boys ended their pretend discussion on which areas of his body they were planning on biting. Edward tilted his head, flicking it to the side in dismissal. The Slytherin boy immediately retreated back into the compartment from which he had just exited, giving me a massive sense of déjà vu. Emmett and Jasper suddenly burst with silent laughter, but Edward still looked angry. Did he upset you? He asked seriously, his face strained with worry. It's only Blaze, he's an idiot. The Slytherins have been using the same material for years. If they were a little more original, maybe they'd have more luck. I frowned, my eyes flying back to Emmett. What was with the snarling, anyway? You looked like you wanted to kill him. Well, as much as we don't mind the other houses not freaking out at the mere sight of us, we need someone to terrify to keep up our self-esteem. And will you be restricting yourselves to just the one student? Nope, we're going for the full house, he explained, grinning wickedly. Excellent. The boys left me then so that they could go and get changed. When I returned to our compartment, I saw that the girls had already slipped into their uniforms. The only difference in their outfits was that they were wearing black ties, and their robes didn't bear a crest, nor were they lined with house colors. I had never even considered where the Cullens would spend the majority of their year, but now, seeing the girls in plain robes belonging nowhere, as of yet set me wondering. Surely they would be sorted, but into which house? The only vampires of whom I was certain were Alice and Emmett. They were Gryffindors through and through. Edward, though undeniably brave in every sense, would fit in well in Ravenclaw. He had spent a good portion of the last century devoting himself to his studies. After all, then again, that had been a result of having little else to do. It wasn't as if he spent much time nowadays with his head in books. I couldn't decide. It was a toss-up between Ravenclaw and Gryffindor, though I prayed for the latter. Rosalie and Jasper were another matter. Both could have been described as ambitious during their human lives, Rosalie seeking to climb the social ladder through marriage, and Jasper rising up the ranks when he fought in the Civil War. She was tenacious, whilst he was thorough and practical. I remembered that both had voted to kill me after Edward had prevented the van from crushing me. I couldn't deny that there were aspects to their personality which matched the requirements for Slytherin. Obviously I would never think of them as bad people because of it, in the same way that I could never dislike Slughorn for the house he belonged to. I truly had no idea whatsoever where they would end up. Perhaps their aversion to Slytherin House would destine them for another. I seriously hoped so. I'd feel bad for them if they had to spend the year cooped up with Blaise and his friends. Alice, I said nervously, have you seen which house you'll be joining? She shook her head morosely. The future is too difficult to predict when it involves Hogwarts. There are too many factors clouding my vision. I can see past Hagrid for a start, and then there's Firenze. Do you think we'll be able to stay together? Rosalie asked, her brow furrowing with worry. I am not sure, I admitted. There are a lot of you, and you're all really different. Being family doesn't necessarily mean you'll be sorted into the same group, but then there are families, like the Weasleys, who all end up in the same house. It all depends on values and character. Well, I think it's fair to say that in terms of values, we're all pretty similar, said Alice, but I don't think the same can be said for character. We fell into silence, then, each of us considering the possibilities the sorting could pose. The boys soon returned, looking exceedingly handsome in their uniforms, each of them garbed in smart, charcoal trousers, white shirts, black ties, and plain dark robes. Nice, said Rosalie, appraising her husband. You too, he winked. Within another 30 minutes, the corridor outside our cabin began crowding with students as the train started to slow, finally drawing to a stop once we reached Hogsmeade. Excitement pulsed through every vein in my body as I was hit with the sudden chilly tingle of the Scottish September air. Hagrid was there to meet the first years on the platform, waiting to take them across the lake in the traditional ending to their first journey to Hogwarts. They pointed at the Cullens as they passed. Obviously the rumors of their arrival had traveled quickly. What are those? Alice asked, wide-eyed, as she stared on at the line of sinister horse-like creatures. Thestrals, I said, climbing into a carriage, the others hopping in after me. They can only be seen by people who've glimpsed death, which I suppose is most of the returning students. They actually really gentle creatures. I could barely sit still during the ride up to the castle. The indigo sky was surprisingly clear and twinkling with hundreds of stars, though a dark gray smudge on the horizon heralded tomorrow's murky weather. I had forgotten just how cold Scotland could be. Even Forks couldn't compete. I wrapped my robes tighter around myself, shivering against the biting chill. Finally, we reached the school gate, where the carriage stopped to let us out. I can believe we're here, said Rosalie, clapping her hands together. I love this place. We filed in through the massive arched doors, passing through into the wondrous, candlelit great hall, the enchanted ceiling as lovely as the real thing, shooting stars decorating the inky blue in a glorious meteor shower. Waiting at the front of the hall, seated at the high table, were the row of teachers, amongst whom I distinguished Esme and Carlisle. They were each wearing smiles that stretched from ear to ear, their eyes greedily taking in the faces of the young witches and wizards who would fall under their instruction this year. Esme waved excitedly upon seeing us. She was clothed in a pretty silver dress which complemented her midnight blue robes. Carlisle's robes were identical in color, as was his tie, which he wore above his pristine white shirt. Where should we sit? Rosalie asked, eyeing the house tables. Until you know where you'll be, sit with me, I said. I searched along the table for familiar faces, and walked to the far end after catching sight of the Weasleys' flaming red hair. Hey up, you lot, Ron greeted us. Glad to be back. More than you know, I smiled, lowering myself onto the bench. I hope they get the sorting over quickly this year. I am starving. But you just ate, Hermione exclaimed, her incredulous expression quickly transforming into one of amusement. 2 pumpkin pasties less than 3/4 of an hour ago. How can you be hungry? Ron doesn't have a stomach, Ginny mocked, just a never-ending pit that will remain unfilled for the rest of time. Thanks for that, Ginny, Ron grimaced, his eyes occasionally flitting back to the empty golden platters before him. You're welcome. She's right, Hermione chortled. I think the Cullens will sprout wrinkles before anyone manages to fill you. Laughter filled the air as our group reacted to the joke. Ron seemed to find humor in his girlfriend's playfulness, and gave her a light-hearted nudge with his shoulder. Even Mum's given up on him, Ginny teased, shaking her head. No matter how many plates she puts in front of him, he always empties them. And, yet, he still looks like a beanpole, Harry teased. You're just jealous of my rippling muscles, said Ron, much to Vampire's amusement, each of whom had more strength in one little finger than any of the witches or wizards occupying the room could ever hope to achieve. In fairness, Ron had bulked up a little now that he had reached his full height. The change was only slight, and although he was still lean, it wasn't difficult to see that the muscles of his forearms had thickened, or to notice that his torso had widened as if he was now expanding outwards instead of vertically. Unfortunately, everyone looked like a beanpole next to Emmett, so Ron was currently at a severe disadvantage. Whilst we were waiting for the hall to fill, we found out that the news of our encounters with Blaise Zabini had spread. Everyone seemed to know about my revenge at the World Cup, which was probably courtesy of Seamus, Ron and Dean. It was certainly a popular topic of conversation, which was probably the reason why the Slytherins were looking so sour. You and the Slytherins are going to have a beautiful relationship this year, Bella, Harry laughed. As always, Ron joked. My gaze flew to Blaise, who was eyeing me odiously, his dark irises swimming with malice. He looked away upon realizing that his stare had attracted Edward's attention regardless of our enmity. I doubted that he would be stupid enough to provoke the vampires. Suddenly, the room fell silent as Professor McGonagall called for everyone's attention. She was clothed in dark green robes which billowed out behind her, and on her head sat a black, crooked witch's hat. To her left stood an old, wooden stool, where the sorting hat had been positioned. The last time I had viewed it, it had been burning brightly, set alight by the snake man whom had sought to silence and destroy those opposing his evil regime. It was fine now though, and if I hadn't witnessed the flames with my own eyes, I never would have guessed that there had been any damage in the first place. Welcome, she said, to another year at Hogwarts school. The student body is considerably larger, as I am sure you've realized, thanks to the return of last year's Newt students. Now that the danger of our time has finally waned, I trust that this year will be a peaceful one, where you shall all be able to attend your studies and complete your exams to the best of your ability. Now, before we begin the feast, let us undertake the sorting. No sooner had she finished speaking when Hagrid trudged into the great hall, leading the line of young, frightened children, all of whom looked minuscule in comparison. The instant they reached the front, the slit at the hat's base which so resembled a mouth opened up as it began to recite its song. Throughout my time as sorting hat, it has been my task to look inside the heads of many, and this question ask, which house will suit your character? Where do you belong? For there are 4 of greatest strength to tell of in this song. First comes boldest Gryffindor, who values courage best, favoring those of valiant heart, far beyond the rest. Hufflepuff loves loyal folk, hard-working to the core, for boys and girls of speedy wit, is clever Ravenclaw. Finally, comes Slytherin, the house of true ambition, where minds of fiery, cunning souls receive the best nutrition. Though generations I have placed, since my starting day, I must encourage unity, in every single way. Diversity should not equate to hostility and spite, coexist with fellowship, for that is good and right, and peace is yours forevermore. Should you respect this rule, treat others as you would be treated. Throughout your days at school, the hat finished to a round of loud, respectful applause. I suppose everyone was relieved to see it a little more optimistic this year, though the advice had not faded now that the threat of Voldemort had disappeared. When the room finally fell silent, McGonagall unfurled her scroll and called the first name. Archer, Lucy, a little girl with lovely blonde ringlets, stepped forwards from the group, hopping up onto the raised platform where she took her place on the stool. She seemed quite at ease, her expression indicating no sign of nerves whatsoever as she waited for the professor to lower the hat onto her head. The cap slipped down over the girl's face, supported by her shoulders whilst it deliberated. Her head had been out of sight for no less than 3 seconds when the hat cried, "Gryffindor." Our table erupted in thunderous applause as the students welcomed the newcomer. McGonagall lifted the sorting hat, revealing Lucy's ecstatic expression. She happily ran from the podium and joined her new comrades. "Beckett, Ellis," called the professor. This time, a dark-haired boy, who seemed tall for his age, took to the stool. He looked less comfortable there than the little girl, but I could hardly blame him. Hufflepuff. The boy seemed happy with the decision, and was visibly relieved that his turn was over as he walked towards the cheering table. Darlington, Gaia was up next, and was the first pupil to be sorted into Ravenclaw. Fairfax, Iris followed her, earning another burst of clapping from the students. I tried not to laugh as I watched Iris take a seat across the table from Luna. The poor girl obviously didn't know what to make of my friend's odd behavior as she wafted the air with her hands, probably trying to do the first year a favor and blow away her rackspurts. The sorting seemed to pass more quickly this year, perhaps because I kept losing my concentration, my eyes often lingering on Edward whilst he watched the youngsters being sent to one of the 4 houses. I was roused from my trance when Ron muttered something to Harry. I threw him a questioning glance. "That kid," he said, nodding towards the platform where McGonagall was about to lower the hat onto the head of a smirking boy with slick, black hair, "is definitely for Slytherin." "Who is he?" "Something Maugraine." "Malum," said Hermione. "Well, anyway," Ron continued, "his dad works for the Ministry. He was one of the gits who pushed for the Muggle-born registration commission." Sure enough, Malum Maugraine joined the Slytherins, who received him gladly. The ceremony seemed to provoke a contest between them and us. When McLaughlin, Aoife joined the Gryffindor table next, everyone made an effort to make as much noise as possible, each of us determined to cheer louder than the Slytherins. Ron and Harry were almost red in the face when they finished screaming for Shakespeare, Samuel, but the Slytherins reacted by loudly stomping their feet as they were awarded Sir Posa, Valina. Finally, the front of the hall was clear of first years, all having taken their rightful places amongst the older pupils. "Now," said Professor McGonagall, her voice triggering a swift and heavy silence, "I trust that you have all already heard the news of our other newcomers, and so I think it best that we, for want of a better phrase, cut to the chase. Would the Cullens and Hales please come forward to be sorted?" Her request instantly set my heart racing, and I squeezed Edward's hand with as much force as I could muster as he rose from the bench beside me. He smiled weakly, before heading off towards the front. The air was alive with whispers, electric and buzzing, all eyes riveted to the vampires as they passed gracefully down the length of the great hall, banded and coordinated like soldiers, the girls side by side at the front, the boys forming a perfect line behind them. If it hadn't already been common knowledge, it would have been easy to guess that the 5 were close, simply by the way they seemed to unite so easily. They all stopped in the same second, and waited for their names to be called. "Cullen, Alice," said Professor McGonagall. Alice danced forwards, a blur of inky black in her eagerness to officially join a house. No sooner had the hat touched her head when it bellowed out the beautiful word. "Gryffindor." "Yes," I cheered, my voice barely audible as the silence exploded into thunderous ovation. Dozens of fists hammered against the wooden table, creating a deafening beat throbbing with the joy of the entire house. Alice sat down beside me, her expression mirroring the same delight and relief surging through my own body. We both squealed in excitement, throwing our arms about each other's neck. "I knew it," I laughed, pulling back as the racket diminished. My excitement instantly morphed the second McGonagall called out Cullen, Edward. The tension was almost unbearable, and if it had been possible to shuffle any farther on the edge of my seat, I would have been sat cross-legged on the floor, biting my nails to distract myself from the heart which was currently trying to break free of its cage. Edward's head disappeared beneath the rim as McGonagall lowered the hat. I could virtually hear the mind of every female student in the room, willing it to call out the name of their house. I chanted the word Gryffindor over and over again in my head, hoping it would be the one I heard. The silence seemed to go on forever, drawn out by indecision and uncertainty. Clearly, Edward was not an easy subject to place. His character was just too complex. Gryffindor, Gryffindor, Gryffindor. The mental mantra continued, my heart accelerating with every second, until its tempo reached the limit. I had repeated the same word so many times in my thoughts, it took me a second to realize that the voice which carried through the hall was separate from my own. Only when others along the table shot to their feet and began screaming their hearts out did I comprehend that the hat had made its decision. My eyes found Edward S. He was wearing a brilliant smile, his eyes twinkling like topaz as he walked along the line of Gryffindors, ready to take his place amongst the rapturous crowd. Lavender was clapping like a seal, bobbing on her toes in her efforts to catch his eye. She whispered something in Parvati's ear, and the pair began giggling with renewed excitement, whilst the girls over at the Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff, and even the Slytherin table, looked on with heartbroken expressions. This is a happy moment, I thought. Don't let it get to you. Welcome to Gryffindor, mate, Seamus ginned, leaning across Harry and Ginny to shake Edward's hand. A mind reader that's exactly what we need, Ron mused. Now we'll know if the Slytherins are planning anything. It'll be brilliant. Oh, come on, Ron, Ginny complained, who do want to spend their time in the minds of the Slytherins? Can you think of a more ghastly place to be? True, he sighed. Well, I guess that means you re of the hook. Don't worry, said Edward, I've got your back. Both Ron and Harry smiled appreciatively, before turning their attention back to the front of the hall. As predicted, Emmett too joined Gryffindor House. The students were becoming louder with each addition. They had been happy with gaining the first 2 vampires, but now that we had the third, everyone desperately wanted to acquire the other 2. I imagined that it was a similar feeling to that a person would experience when playing the lottery. Not that I knew personally. You get 2 numbers and you think that'll be it, but then you get the third and your mind instantly flies to the possibility that you could win the full set. It was when Jasper took to the stool that the tension really started to build. Edward's smile slowly sank into a frown, his brow furrowing with worry. Edward, I whispered, it's conflicted. It can decide between Ravenclaw and Gryffindor. I certainly hadn't expected that. Jasper is a strategist. He weighs up all the options and picks the one that will benefit those around him the most, but then his morals and his gut sometimes force him to do the opposite. His past is going to have a big influence. I think his human deeds say a lot about him. That was true, and I couldn't forget that he had consciously made the effort to resist the call of human blood, even before he had met Alice. I felt bad for thinking he could ever be destined for Slytherin. There was definitely a Gryffindor in there, and the Sorting Hat seemed to agree. Gryffindor, woo, Alice screamed, jumping to her feet and clapping gleefully with the others as her husband sprung from the stool, wearing a smile that touched his eyes. I knew it. No you didn't, he laughed. You were as clueless as the rest of us. I had a gut feeling, she said adamantly, and since my visions are just an extension of my fantastic intuition, there was never any reason to doubt that this was where you'd end up. Yeah, right, Emmett snorted, rolling his eyes before turning his focus to the last remaining vampire now seated on the platform. The hat took even longer than it had with Jasper. In fact, I couldn't remember having seen it take such a lengthy amount of time in all my years at school. Even Harry hadn't had to wait this long to join a table. I'd feel awful for Rosalie if she was separated from her family now, after every single one of them had been placed in the same house. What's taking so long? Emmett demanded in a whisper, his eyes snapping to his brother. More vacillation, was all he would say. Which houses? But he just shook his head, his mouth pressing into a tight line, and that was when I knew that Slytherin was in the running. The silence, for the longest time, was absolute, at least to my limited human ears, and the only thing to break it initially was the blatant rumbling of Ron's stomach. The sound drained a little of the tension, especially when his face turned a vivid shade of red. The instant my focus switched to my blushing friend, the hat once again called out the name the entire Gryffindor table had been longing to hear. Hell yes, Emmett cried, clapping his hands together in celebration. Rosalie smiled as she walked towards us, but it looked a little forced. Carlisle and Esme, who were seated between Flitwick and Slughorn, were clapping with enthusiasm now that the last of their children had been sorted, their countenances proud, radiating the utmost satisfaction. Esme looked like the cat that had captured the canary. Hey, babe, Emmett grinned, sliding an arm around his wife. I knew you'd make it. She squeezed his hand and took her seat, not seeming to notice the way that the eyes of almost every adolescent boy in the room were centered on her. Yep, she's definitely upset. Alice was about to comment, only she was cut off by the headmistress, who had taken her seat at the center of the high table. Now, before we begin our feast, Professor Dumbledore has requested that he be allowed to say a few words. McGonagall's statement provoked a wave of confused mutterings, and if it hadn't been for my knowledge of the portrait hanging in her office, I would have seriously pondered the woman's sanity. She waved a hand towards the large canvas hanging directly behind her. The frame was empty, though nothing but a flat, black background surrounded by gold. Mere seconds after the teacher had made the announcement, the old bespectacled, white-bearded man came ambling into the picture. "Ah," he said, a carefree smile occupying his face, "right on time, I see. As some of you may know, I happen to be a big fan of music, so I would have been sorely disappointed to have to miss out on the school song. Fortunately, Professor McGonagall was kind enough to oblige me this lovely portrait so that I may enjoy that particular treat. First, though, you all need watering and feeding, so before you begin your feast, I would like to share a few words, which I think you all ought to consider whilst tucking into the snap dollop." Hubbub, bubble, tweak, thank you, I smiled, already having grown accustomed to the old headmaster's strangeness. The vampires were still wearing baffled expressions as a variety of mouth-watering food suddenly materialized onto the once empty plates, causing a range of delicious scents to simultaneously attack my senses. I didn't know what to go for. What a beautiful sight. Ron practically dribbled as he attacked the stuffed pig with a carving knife, slicing off a sizable slab of pork. He moaned loudly as he transferred a piece to his mouth, which only made me laugh harder. "Hey, they even catering to the vampires," Emmett blurted, reaching for the golden jug sat before him. A stream of crimson liquid poured into his goblet, and after he had filled his own, he proceeded to provide the others with their share. "Dous bumtilo you starf?" Ron asked, his words marred by the glob of food rolling around in his mouth. "We kind of thought we'd be eating out," Edward smiled, sipping at his blood. "You know this tastes different to the stuff we had at the World Cup and in the leaky cauldron. Have you noticed?" Emmett inquired. "It's probably a different species," Hermione guessed. "Perhaps it's like wine. A Pinot Grigio tastes different to a Chardonnay. Maybe you're right. We'll have to have a dragon tasting party to find out." "I like that idea," Alice laughed, her half-gold eyes sparkling with the notion. The food was wonderful as usual. I had a relatively modest portion, since I wanted to save room for dessert, and opted for a slice of beef, a Yorkshire pudding, a few boiled potatoes, and peas, which I topped with gravy. It was piping hot, but I welcomed the heat in my stomach after the chilly journey from Hogsmeade Station. Everyone seemed to be enjoying the feast thus far, even the vampires, though Rosalie's smile occasionally transformed into a sad frown, which the witches and wizards soon noticed. "What's wrong, Rosalie?" Ginny asked, picking up on the vampire's plummeting mood. "You don't look very happy to be here." "No, it's not that," she replied hastily, obviously not wanting to seem ungrateful. "Then, what's wrong?" Hermione questioned, reaching for her goblet. Rosalie stared down at the table, almost as if she was too ashamed to meet the eyes of those surrounding her. "It's just the Sorting Hat wanted to put me in Slytherin." I sighed, wishing I knew how to alleviate her sudden depression, but, unfortunately, I wasn't gifted with the same abilities as Jasper. Luckily, it didn't matter because Harry came to the rescue. "I wouldn't worry about that," he assured her. "It wanted to put me in Slytherin, too." Her head snapped in his direction, her eyes narrowing disbelievingly. I was fully aware that my own expression had also turned incredulous. Harry had never disclosed that fact in front of me before. The idea that the Sorting Hat would ever have considered him suitable for Slytherin was absurd. "You," Rosalie clarified, her tone suggesting skepticism. "But you killed Voldemort, and you were ready to let him kill you for the sake of everyone else." He shrugged and said, "The hat still recognized certain qualities in me that would have fit well in Slytherin, but I asked it not to put me there. Dumbledore said that that's what makes us our choices." "Did you ask it not to put you there, too?" I begged, she admitted, a little more cheerfully this time. "Well, then, you belong here. Besides, not everyone with ambition turns out bad. Slughorn is nice enough he was there for the battle. Don't forget Professor Snape, Hermione smiled kindly. He was in Slytherin, and look what we owe him our lives, no doubt, as do countless others. The distress had now completely vanished from the beautiful blonde-s face, and instead had been replaced with an undeniable gratitude. Thank you, she said, almost shyly, which was definitely new for Rosalie. Even Edward looked taken aback as she conveyed her appreciation. I had a feeling that Hogwarts would definitely have a positive influence, not only on Rosalie, but on the rest as well. Eternal life may have given them infinite time to develop and perfect their skills and knowledge, but being a vampire was hardly good for social interaction. A year in the magical community was exactly what the doctor had ordered. When all our plates were empty excluding Ron's, the leftovers disappeared into thin air, only to be replaced moments later by every dessert I could think of. There was chocolate gâteau, sticky toffee pudding, cream-covered sponge cake, fruit salad, jam roly-poly, apple pie, strawberry cheesecake, every major flavor ice cream, blood-flavored lollipops, and the list went on. This is the hardest decision I've ever had to make, Ron said, looking distressed. If you eat quickly, Harry pointed out, you could almost manage a bit of everything. Good idea, Ron agreed, taking a generously sized slice of cheesecake. My insides felt as warm and gooey as the sticky toffee pudding when the feast came to a close. The Cullens were still happily sucking on their lollipops, even when Professor McGonagall rose from her chair to address the hall. Before I send you off to your houses, there are a few matters which I wish to discuss. Firstly, may I introduce Philomela Folkloom, who will this year be teaching Transfiguration. She waved a hand to her right, where a woman in pale blue robes, who could surely have been no older than 35, was sitting. All in all, she looked lovely, her golden hair falling in loose ringlets to her waist, framing a face that was, as of yet, free of lines. She smiled lightly during the introduction, her eyes traveling along each table as she examined the faces of the students. Next, said Professor McGonagall, is our new Muggle Studies professor, Esme Cullen, whom I am sure you all will recognize, or at least heard of. Esme looked absolutely radiant as she sat waving gently at the pupils. Her snowy teeth practically sparkled as they caught the candle light, causing the males occupying the room to give a collective sigh. I giggled into my palm. Dr. Carlisle Cullen will assist her whilst off duty from St. Mungo's Hospital, and will give a series of lectures on medical practices used in the non-magical community. That's right, Emmett whispered, tell them they'll be playing doctor and patient. That's bound to fill the class with drooling teenage girls. Carlisle's eyes focused in on his son, obviously having heard the crack, but he continued to grin happily nonetheless. Remilda Vane actually swooned at the sight of the glorious doctor. I had a feeling that the hospital wing would be full this year, its occupants all hoping for a visit from a certain vampire medic. The Forbidden Forest is, as usual, forbidden. No student is to enter, unless instructed and accompanied by a teacher. Also, Mr. Filch, our caretaker, has asked me to remind you that no magic is to be performed in the corridor between classes. Quidditch trials are to be held in the second week of term. Anyone wishing to try out should contact the house team captain. And now, I will pass you over to Professor Flitwick for the school song. The tiny teacher hopped down off his stool and walked to the front of the platform, where he fired a long, golden ribbon from the end of his wand. It flew above high into the air, hovering over the teacher's table to form the familiar words. Would you care to do the honors, Professor Dumbledore? Asked Flitwick. Why, I'd be delighted, said the old, bearded man. He lifted his arms in the air as the conductor of an orchestra might. As per usual, everyone picked their favorite tune and sang along. Ready, 1, 2, and the school roared, Hogwarts, Hogwarts, Hoggy-Warty Hogwarts. Teach us something, please. Whether we be old and bald, or young with scabby knees, our heads could do with filling, with some interesting stuff, for now they re-bare and full of air, dead flies and bits of fluff. So teach us things worth knowing. Bring back what we've forgot. Just do your best, we'll do the rest. And learn until our brains all rot. Emmett's voice carried over the rest. He seemed to find some hilarity in the song's lyrics, though I had no idea why they seemed fairly normal to me. Like always, everyone finished at different times. In the end, The last to be left chanting were 3 young boys and girl, who were singing to the tune of the British national anthem. When I looked along our table, I realized that one of them was Amicus, and couldn't help but grin. Everyone clapped after they finished, Dumbledore more enthusiastically than anyone. "Wonderful," he pronounced, "absolutely charming. Another enchanting memory to keep me occupied until next year's opening feast, and now that I have enjoyed the magic that is music, I think it is time for me to be on my way. Good night all. Toodily pip," and off he went, disappearing out of the right-hand side of the portrait, leaving the dark canvas behind him empty. "The teachers and I would like to wish you good luck for the coming year," McGonagall said, taking over as she rose from her place, "and to encourage that you each strive to fulfill your potential. Now, would you all kindly follow Professor Dumbledore's lead off to bed?" "Well, that's that," said Ron, rising from the bench along with the rest of us. "Our last first feast." He was about to set off in the direction of the giant doors leading out into the entrance hall, but Hermione grabbed his sleeve before he could take the first step. "Ron," she said, "we have to direct the first years. They don't know the way, remember." He groaned loudly, before following on after Hermione to round up the children. "Bloody midgets," he muttered as he left. I rolled my eyes and set off with the others, but we hadn't even reached the stairs when Edward stopped us. "We need to go see Professor Slughorn," he announced. "Carlisle says we should wait outside his office." "Why?" I asked, my mind sifting through the possible reasons for the summons. "He doesn't know," he shrugged. "It was just an instruction given to him by Professor McGonagall." "Well, where is Slughorn's office?" Jasper inquired. "I'll take you," I said, leading them up the stairs until we reached the 6th floor, where we separated from Harry, Ginny, Neville, Dean and Seamus, who continued on up. "Edward, you'll have to keep an eye on them until they've made it into the common room, or we won't know the password." "I will do," he nodded, his face possessing a far-off look as his eyes traveled over the stained glass windows and the hanging tapestries. Slughorn arrived 5 minutes after us, his forehead glimmering with the sheen of perspiration, whilst his cheeks were tinted scarlet after he had been forced to climb the series of stairs leading from the ground floor. "Ah, there you are," he puffed, sliding a brass key from the pocket of his brown robes. "I was worried I'd have to make the trek up to Gryffindor Tower." Come on in, come on in." We all headed in through the doors, passing from the corridor into Slughorn's luxurious office. "Now, where did I put them?" he said to himself, rummaging through his many cupboards. Finally, he walked to his desk, where he seemed to locate the thing he had been looking for. Aha! He picked up 2 corked glass bottles, their deep emerald tone obscuring the contents. "Right," he said, handing one to Jasper and the other to Alice, before flicking his wand in the air and conjuring 5 shot glasses. "Listen carefully, you don't want to get this wrong." The shot glasses whizzed towards the vampires, hovering until they were plucked from the air. "When the other students begin climbing into bed, you are each to take 1 shot of the potion I've prepared for you. Alice, I'd recommend that you only fill yours 3/4 full, since your size will increase the time it takes your body to use it up." "What does it do?" Rosalie asked suspiciously. "It's a sleeping draught," revealed Slughorn. "What? But we can sleep," Jasper argued. "Hence the reason why I am giving you the sleeping draught," the professor chuckled. "Did you think you'd be allowed to wander the halls at night like a bunch of spooks? Ha, no, no. You'll be tucked up in bed just like the others." "We get to sleep?" Rosalie asked incredulously. "Yes, but be sure you get the right measurements, or you'll be out for days." I don't know what I had expected, but it certainly hadn't been this. Edward, too, looked flabbergasted, though hopeful in the same moment. It reminded me of the wistful expression he had worn in the early days of our relationship, whenever we had discussed the matter of sleep. "Will we dream?" he asked quietly, his eyes fixed to Potion's master. "Yes, your mind will still be active. You should have more control over your dreams than us humans, but it won't be total. Your subconscious will have a hand on the reins as well. Are there any side effects?" I questioned, alerting Slughorn to my presence. I doubted that he had noticed me before now he had been so focused on the vampires. "Ah, Miss Swan, I didn't see you there." No, nothing to worry about. It's just little things. I understand that," As vampires, you don't necessarily require oxygen. Even so, you may experience the urge to yawn after waking, as the potion reawakens that particular human reflex. Also, there may be a little drowsiness in the morning when it begins to wear off. I think that covers everything, he said. Any questions? When nobody moved to speak, Slughorn rubbed his palms together and sent us on our way. Spit spot, off to the dormitory. I can't believe it, I mumbled as we approached the fat lady. I thought for sure that you'd be up all night sneaking about the castle. So did I, Edward grinned, turning his attention to the portrait. The others held their breath, immersed in suspense as they waited for the next Hogwarts secret to be revealed. Virtus Magnus. Right you are, the fat lady cried, swinging forwards to admit us, there be releasing the blare of music playing in her chambers. I climbed through the circular hole, eager to join the party. Someone had turned the wizarding wireless to full blast, so that the songs of the Weird Sisters filled the air, provoking at least half the Gryffindors into energetic displays as they danced around the armchairs, seeming completely carefree now that they were home. Others were scattered about the room, some playing exploding Snap and Wizard's chess, or talking animatedly amongst themselves. Wow, Alice chimed, her eyes wide as she took in her surroundings. I think I am going to like it here. I think you will, too, I smiled, before heading towards the wizards and witches in my year. Edward, Jasper and Emmett launched into a discussion with Ron. Seamus and Dean Rosalie and Alice conversed with Hermione and Ginny, asking about classes and school routine. I, however, was more interested in acquiring information regarding Quidditch practice. Once again, Harry had been picked to lead the team, so he gave me all the necessary information on tryouts, informing me of the days he was planning on booking the pitch. Eventually, the common room began to empty, and I was certainly not the last to leave it. I'd been up extremely early that morning thanks to the massive time difference. To say I was tired would have been a bit of an understatement. My old dormitory seemed to have expanded to fit the 2 extra beds that would belong to the female vampires. The other witches still hadn't retired when me, Rosalie and Alice entered the dorm. They were still having fun in the common room, not yet tired enough to attempt sleep. You know, when I packed pajamas, Alice said, extracting a pair of silky shorts from her case, I only did it so that we could mingle in better with everyone else. I never thought we'd actually be sleeping in them. Did you pack for the boys? I asked, slipping into the deep blue bottoms she had insisted I bring. In fairness, they were warm as well as pretty. Silver ribbon had been sewn along the waistband and around the footholes. There was also a matching top with long sleeves. I packed some sweats for them. I nodded, folding my clothes into a neat pile and placing them at the foot of my bed. Okay, I am going to go and say good night to Edward. Are you two coming? I thought we weren't allowed in their dormitory, said Rosalie. I felt a sharp pang as I realized she looked just as beautiful in pajamas. She made elasticated pants and spaghetti straps look like runway fashion. They're not allowed in ours, but we can go in theirs. Oh, right, fair enough. The 3 of us headed back down to the common room and over to the boys' staircase, climbing until we reached the correct dormitory. Rosalie knocked on the door, speaking at her usual volume. It's us. Can we come in? The second she fell quiet, the door opened, and there stood Edward, looking effortlessly glorious in a pair of gray sweats and a white vest. He held the door open as the girls strolled inside to join their counterparts, shutting it lightly after I had crossed the threshold. Like our dormitory, the boys seemed to have expanded too. We came to wish you good night, Alice said, her arms secured around Jasper's neck. And sweet dreams, Rosalie finished, winking at her husband as she pulled him gently onto the bed. So I guess this means we re-potioning up first. He smiled, pouring the blue liquid into 3 separate shot glasses. Rosalie nodded, whilst Alice crossed over to Emmett's bedside table, taking the 2 extra glasses and passing them to the Jasper and Edward, who climbed into bed after receiving their share. Bottoms up, said Emmett, raising his glass into the air. Cheers, the other 2 said in unison, before all 3 brought the shots to their lips and swallowed the contents in one like they would a tequila slammer. Edward placed his glass on his own bedside table, pulling his covers around us as he waited for the magic to take effect. I haven't slept in almost a century, he smiled, running his fingers through my hair. I wonder what I'll dream about. You'll have to let me know in the morning, I murmured, noticing how his breathing was beginning to slow. He said, his eyelids sagging slightly. I think it's already starting to work. My brain feels fuzzy. Raxperts, I whispered, feeling the corners of my mouth twitching upwards. Yeah, I think they got in. He was nearly as articulate as usual as he fought the stupor. It was actually quite an endearing thing to see the way his eyelids fluttered shut, and his smile shrunk until only a ghost of it remained on his pale lips. He looked vulnerable in sleep, and more peaceful than I had ever seen him. For the very first time, I could understand why Edward had enjoyed watching me slumber every night. If I hadn't been so tired, I would have stayed with him for hours. Unfortunately, I was only human, and I was absolutely exhausted. I slid from beneath the covers, gently pulling them back up once my feet were on the cold floor. They look so peaceful, don't they? Rosalie asked, echoing my earlier thoughts. She was lovingly stroking Emmett's hair, gazing on in wonderment at her sleeping husband. Alice's expression mirrored that of her sister. They almost look like ordinary boys, she said, after kissing Jasper on the forehead and slipping from his side. I like seeing them like this. Me too, Rosalie admitted, taking one last look at Emmett before turning back to Alice and me. Well, I guess we should get back. The longer we leave it, the longer they'll have to wait for us to wake up. Alice and I agreed, and the three of us slinked from the room, leaving the sleepers to weave happy dreams. We will continue in next part.